If you want a vision of the future, Winston, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Someone is trying to teach me a lesson in futility. Why am I the only one who isn't killed?
They will run you dizzy. They will pile falsehood on top of falsehood until you can't tell a lie from the truth, and you won't even want to. That's how the powerful keep their power. Don't you read the papers?
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
I'm going to get your money for you. But if you don't get the President of the United States on that phone, you know what's going to happen to you?
What?
You're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola Company.
The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime.
Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have Dr. Katherine Horton on the show. Dr. Horton, how are you doing?
I'm fine. Nice to be on your show.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. I'll let you introduce yourself. What's your quick bio here? What can you tell us about yourself?
So I'm originally a particle physicist. I did my research career at the University of Oxford, where I obtained a PhD in particle physics, and I worked for years at two accelerator sites. One was the German electron synchrotron called DESY in Hamburg. The other one was CERN, the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva. And after working in particle physics for a number of years, I actually wanted to study complex human systems. And at the time, I was employed by St. John's College, Oxford, and they have these wonderful fellowships where you can just go after your research interests and focus on what you think is most important. And I actually felt that the biggest challenges that mankind faced was actually coming from complex human systems and their malfunctioning. So what I mean by that is what we saw in the financial crisis. So finance is a human system, and so is law and many other things that we take for granted. Economies are human systems, and we take them almost set in stone, but they are not. A lot of them are conventions, traditions, habits, and some systems are better than others. And what happened is that when I started my fellowship at St. John's College, that's when the financial crisis hit. And because of my fellowship, I was sheltered from the consequences, but a lot of people I knew were not. So I saw people lose their savings. I also saw people lose their jobs. And I just couldn't believe that something on that scale could happen. And that's when I thought, well, I don't think, I was working with such brilliant people in particle physics. It was amazing. These big experiments, you work with thousands and thousands of physicists in a wonderful organizational structure where everybody can just freely do whatever they like. And particle physics by now is a very well-established field. And I felt, I just can't add to that. They are such brilliant people. They're doing fine without me. I should really go off and look into things where, maybe people need help and I can actually add, some thoughts or insights. So I really decided to just up sticks and go, and I left CERN, and I went back to Oxford, and I explained to my supervisors that I really want to change fields, and I said, sure, just do it. So I started studying complex human systems. So I started looking into first big companies, and this is how I became targeted. And you wouldn't believe it, because I was essentially just a bland academic at the time. So I'm not a terrorist. I never wanted to go up against intelligence agencies or the government, and in fact, I never have. Nevertheless, I ended up on this brutal government assault program that's aimed at my slow kill, basically. And how that came about is as follows. I spent some time looking into how companies work, and for especially big companies, and then economies, and then, of course, finance, because of the financial crisis. And I wanted to have an actual case study where I could see how a complex system behaved close up. And getting into companies is very difficult because they're very secretive, and, time is money. And I thought maybe the best system to study would be the English legal system, because it is fairly transparent. And at the time when I had this idea, there was a very famous court case in the High Court in London, and that was Berezovsky versus Abramovich. It was in the papers almost daily. So you had these big oligarchs battling it out. Lots of fireworks, very interesting details, in the actual court hearings about their lifestyle, which is just mind-blowing, compared to what the average person would do. So it was like, a fireworks in its own self, but in its own right. But even more than that, it also had very high-profile lawyers. Lawyers who were said to be the biggest brains in England, and so on. So I thought, wow, you can just go and have a look. You can literally it's a public hearing. The public has got a right to actually see court hearings. And I thought, I'll just go along. I'm a researcher, so I make that my first case study. And I went along, and it was very, very interesting. But after just a few days, I had the feeling that I was being followed. And when I first began going to the court hearings, they started in, I think, late September 2011, and I joined at the end of October. And of course, these are very rich men with huge security, entourages. So I thought, surely they must have thought I'm the odd one out. Even though there were lots of people who attended, lots of journalists, but maybe I stuck out. Maybe they just went through and, discovered I'm not a journalist, and they thought, who the hell is she? So at first I didn't even mind being followed around. I just thought people got nervous, and, I thought if I just, behave normally, they'll figure out I'm actually a fellow at St. John's, because my face was up on the website. I was going back to St. John's every day. But the following just never stopped. So I was, I think I attended the court hearing for 6 weeks, and it just got worse and worse and worse. At first, they just followed me home, and that was obvious enough. But then after a while, there was a man waiting at the end of my drive every morning when so I was traveling down every day from Oxford to London on the train. And I would come out of my flat, and I would go to the end of the drive and turn into the street, and there would be a man just standing there waiting. And of course, your first thought is, oh yes, he's just waiting for somebody. So you just, continue walking, and suddenly you realize he's following you, and he set off exactly when you set off. And that happens once, and you think, weird, but could be coincidence, never mind. And then the next day, there would be another man waiting, even more in your face. And again, he would set off when you set off and follow you, 20 meters behind you. And it just kept happening every day. And bit by bit, the man wouldn't follow me all the way to the train station, just to the end of the road. And there someone else would take over, who'd be just standing there waiting, smoking a cigarette, and then set off when I arrived, and follow me. And this is how the entire national surveillance network was essentially pantomimed out to me bit by bit. Had I just been thrown into the routine gang stalking and not be led to actually see how it's built up step by step, maybe I might not have discovered what it actually is for even longer. But as it was pretty clear to me that this is, first of all the people are British, not Russian. They seem to know the area very well, and there seem to be a lot of them, So they seem to pass my stalking from one person to the next. I mean, there's usually more than just one person following you. There seems to be like a cloud. But overall, you have roughly this sort of pattern that one person keeps an eye on you at any one point in time. And they would follow me all the way to London and back. So at that point, I thought that's MI5 for sure, and I thought, well, fair enough. Maybe they just, they don't understand what I'm doing here, but they'll figure it out. So this is how it all started. But then when it started becoming really creepy was when this didn't stop at the end of the court hearings. So after 6 weeks, the case was finished, the hearings were over, and I just stayed in Oxford and continued my research. But what happened then is that I was stalked on my short trips between my flat and college. And there would be people waiting for me, and they were actively trying to catch my attention. And at the time, I didn't know what the hell it was. Now I know it's called street theater, and it's essentially one of those standard routine things. But at the time, all I noticed is that it was actually spy theater. So men in trench coats and dark hats would be waiting, talking on mobile phones, pointing at me, cutting me up, or somehow getting in my way, never talking to me, just trying to get my attention. And this just went on and on and on. And one of the things I noticed is that they wouldn't do it every day, but they do it roughly every second day. And every third day, roughly, there would be something quite noticeable. And as I was watching this, this pantomime, I thought that very much looks like a conditioning routine to me. They train you to respond to certain things. So if you just walk past somebody in a trench coat and dark hat, he could also be, wearing sunglasses and look very agent-like, as you might think about an agent from films. But you wouldn't think it's strange. You would just think, oh, weirdo, and then walk on. When you see that about a dozen times, then you start responding. Your brain automatically picks up on this, especially if these people, got in the way or were slightly menacing, slightly threatening. Your brain is trained to notice these things and spot dangers. So the intelligence agencies use this fact that to condition you to respond to their theater. And they have to do that to kind of map you out, I think, to kind of gauge your responses. And once you figured out what it is, the entire gang stalking system becomes crystal clear, because every victim of the intelligence agencies reports the same. And once you have seen it like that, how they do it, you also don't have a lot of these misconceptions about, what stalking is, what surveillance is, and so on. For example, the first question that victims of the intelligence agencies are always confronted with is, yes, but why would they all follow you? Why would so many people be interested in you? Well, this is the wrong question to ask. These people are hired by MI5 as a surveillance network. They are there Monday to Friday to Sunday, 24/7, and they stalk whomever they have to stalk. They are not there for any one person. They are there doing a job. And if you're on a list, if you're on a surveillance list, they will kind of cluster around you like a cloud and follow you around. And also you can figure out that it's much more efficient to have a decentralized system whereby you have your people all across the country. And when a target or, comes into a certain area of town, this person will be stalked by the people who are already there. And the reason why it makes sense is because those people will have local knowledge. They will know, what shortcuts to take, etc. They'll know the terrain. Whereas if you had, two guys in a trench coat following someone around in a car, it's easy to lose a person, and also victims would notice. So this is how the surveillance network works. It's essentially a decentralized system. And yes, the other thing that a lot of people don't understand is they say, yes, but why would they follow you 24/7? That's a standard question. And the answer is so easy. It's because you either follow somebody or you don't follow them at all. You can't just keep someone under surveillance, 9 till 5, because if they then take the car in the middle of the night and drive off, you would have lost them. So the National Surveillance Network is set up such that once you're on a list, you are surveyed 24/7, all the time, non-stop, and they don't let go. And once you have understood that, it's also pretty clear that they have to also stay somewhere nearby. So it follows that they will rent properties by default in your area. Or they might have, their local stalkers already living near to you, and they will just use their homes and so on. So that's how it started. It started really in a harmless fashion. And then it just kept going on and on. So for an entire year in Oxford, I just had these weird spectacles, mostly men. The people who were trying to get in my face were mostly older men. And that adds an extra layer of threatening feeling. But then it just got worse and worse. After a while, there was a break. I think it was about after 8 months, there was a break-in into my home. And also that is extremely common with the victims of the intelligence agencies. They will come home and they will realize that nothing of value has been stolen, but something has happened in their flat to make it clear that someone was in there. So, for example, what happened to me is I came back home, I opened my cupboard and I realized it had been completely rearranged. And I knew someone had been in there. I had just opened that cupboard before I left the house. It was clear it wasn't me. But at the same time, I couldn't just go to, Thames Valley Police and say someone came in and rearranged my shoe cupboard, because people would just laugh at me and think I'm mad. And that's exactly what it's designed to do. So the methods of the intelligence agencies are such that they are set up for plausible deniability. So they try to have an effect on you while at the same time minimizing any danger or exposure to themselves. And this is how they do it. They do ludicrous things to victims, so that if a victim recounts accurately what has happened to them, the ridiculousness of the situation will kind of be projected onto the victim talking about it. And they are extremely successful doing that. This was developed by, or not developed, no, by no means. This was perfected by the Stasi in a program called Zersetzung, which is disintegration. And the Zersetzung disintegration program was run in East Germany, and they were trying to discredit people and destroy their lives systematically by putting them through every imaginable psychological terror you could think of. And one of the key elements was the stalking, always being followed, always feeling threatened, people coming into your home, breaking things, rearranging things, taking things away, or putting objects there that don't belong to you. And if you keep doing that to a human being, you take away the, how to put it? Well, the safe space, you suddenly don't feel safe in your home because people make it clear to you that they can come in at any point in time. And the psychological effect on a human being is devastating. And they know that, and that's why they do it. So that was the goal with me, I don't know why they had to break into my home. Maybe it was part of their program and they would have done it anyway. Maybe they were training their trainee spies, who, by the way, are literally teenagers, to maybe do a break-in, because they also do that. I have no idea. Or maybe they thought she clearly doesn't seem to care about the stalking. Let's, ratchet it up. No idea. But when I came home and I realized that, I had seen this before, because I had grown up in communist Romania, and my parents and I had fled communist Romania. We were Hungarians. We were part of the German-Hungarian minority, and we'd fled to Germany when I was young. So I did my school career in Germany, but I do remember vividly exactly the same methods being used by the Securitate in Romania. So I grew up with this stuff. It's nothing new. I've seen that done to my grandparents. And when I saw my cupboard, I thought, oh, here we go again. That's a Stasi break-in, It's a Secret Service break-in, what I experienced. So, but I already knew it's MI5, and again I thought, okay, never mind. And I knew I couldn't go to the police, so I thought, well, at some point they will stop. But they didn't, and that's what's so heartbreaking, because every single victim thinks, oh, surely they will just, let off at some point. If I just keep quiet, if I just don't do anything, they will just leave me in peace. But they don't. They really don't. They become ever more psychopathic. So if anybody hears this and thinks, oh, I'm a victim and I'm just being gang stalked, my message is, okay, quick. You have to kick off the biggest fuss you possibly can, because you're on a program and it will just get worse. It will literally turn into physical mutilation to the, with the goal of killing you. That's what I know about this program now, but I didn't know it at the time. So, it went from there. And imagine at the time I was still naive. I thought, okay, I'll just keep it quiet. I didn't want to bother the other fellows, so I never told any of the other fellows about it. I never went to the police because I couldn't. I didn't think I would be taken seriously. And then I thought, oh, surely it's just some sort of mistake and they will just stop. And then I thought, well, I'm going to move back to Germany. That was after a year of this. And I thought, surely by the time I'm back in Germany, it will be fine. But it wasn't fine. It followed me into Germany. And it was continued, not just with exactly the same methods. They even used the same conditioning triggers. So a conditioning trigger is something you have been conditioned to respond to. So in my case, that was, for example, these grey trench coats and dark hats, because they did it over and over. And in Germany, they would use exactly the same methods. And it's not always trench coats and that. Sometimes people get honked at by yellow cars and so on. So it could be anything. It's just something repetitive that annoys you enough that you notice. And then in Germany, it just got worse. In Germany, I was trying to start a company, and anybody who tried to do that knows how vulnerable you are, because your finances get a hit. You don't have the network necessarily. You're trying to make new connections. And what the German intelligence agency did is they used that vulnerable moment to utterly obliterate my attempts. So they infiltrated every single business meeting I was trying to have with potential customers, potential business partners, and they ridiculed me. So the way they did that is they would, have someone just pretend to be a genuine business contact, either approach me or just set themselves up such that, I would approach them because they would be an obvious person to approach. And then they would try to set up a meeting with me and somehow in the meeting do something so egregious that it would be clear that it was not serious and it was a setup. And this would happen once and twice. And then eventually I realized that wherever I was reaching out to, this would happen, eventually. And when you're trying to launch a business and you have this sort of sabotage and infiltration, it becomes impossible,
What was the nature of the business?
Well, what I was trying to do, and that actually grew out of what I had worked on before, because I looked into the economies and what was happening with the labor market. And the biggest concern for me, especially after the financial crisis, was just how many people had lost their jobs, their livelihoods. And what I saw was an economy that was going towards ever bigger companies, ever fewer companies. Mm-hmm. And what I was trying to do is set up essentially a platform, an online platform to help people get jobs and try to help people set up their own businesses. So in a sense, it was a startup helping other startups,
okay.
But for private people.
Yeah, the reason why this might be relevant, I think you probably considered this, is in doing that, you're devising alternative methods for wealth creation and independence, and that challenges this the cartel.
Oh yes, I absolutely agree. And you know what? At the time, it's interesting how much our worldview changes when we undergo these things. So at the time, if you had told me about the existence of this cartel, and that they have this worldview that they want to control everybody, not just what we do and what we eat, but also, when we go to bed, when we wake up, who we marry, everything. I would have thought, you're mad. I literally would have thought, no, that's a bit too out there, someone's fantasy ran away. And now, after half a decade of having studied this and experienced it, that's exactly what it is.
Yes, it's
you're right.
It's technocracy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an absolute total psychopathology fueled with technology and obsessions.
You mentioned that this started when you were following this case back in the UK, Bezarowski versus Abramovich.
Mm-hmm.
These two Russian oligarchs.
Yes.
Now, I'm just maybe you've considered this too, that if you have studied the takedown of Russia in the 90s, the raping of Russia, the stripping of its assets, both financial and also natural resources, it was more or less orchestrated by the City of London and Wall Street and the boys at Harvard. And this also involved supposedly the issuance of some $240 billion in fraudulent bonds in the early 90s, and this is Operation Hammer under the Bush administration. And this factors into 9/11. The attacks of 9/11 because it was the day or two after 9/11 those bonds were coming due. And it was the attacks that allowed for that day to be, put off. And the Federal Reserve, in response then, in order to save the market, so to speak, supposedly, they more or less waived all these regulatory requirements, that supposedly make sure the bonds are genuine and all that. Basically, it was a big heist.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, by getting involved I'm just wondering maybe if this legal case between these two oligarchs threatened to expose the intrigues of London and Washington, D.C., and also Wall Street in raping Russia.
I think yes, I think it did, but I think it certainly did it independent of my presence there, because I think actually the court case itself didn't spell it out, but there was enough material there for anybody with half a brain to pick up on that, And the journalists were there. And actually one of the things I noticed, because I was, sitting behind the journalists and I saw exactly the same as they saw. Sometimes I would go home and then the next day I would read in the papers how they reported the hearing that I attended. And I was shocked just how little there was in there,
Yeah.
You have to really have seen, an event that then gets reported in the papers to realize how much censorship and distortion is, how they try to paint a picture. So I totally agree with you. And
Bezarowski, I think, is the one he's committed suicide a few years ago. Am I wrong?
He died, certainly. I'm not sure if he committed suicide or if he was suicided.
When I say, was he suicided? Yeah, he was a former billionaire, multi-billionaire, turned only a billionaire or something. So they say somehow he committed suicide because of his financial reverses, but I think he still owns several yachts or something. I don't know, but I'm not sure. He did die recently, and the official story was suicide. So yeah.
I don't know. I you know what? I don't know. That's the thing. I went to that hearing not because of the Russians, and I think I was the only person there who approached the entire case and the entire topic entirely neutrally, because I knew nothing about them, absolutely nothing. And I knew what happened in Russia, but not in great detail. I was actually interested in the court and how it functioned. So I was much more interested in the actual lawyers and the legal process, how they processed information, because I was looking at it under the viewpoint of how can you make this entire operation more efficient.
But it's designed to be inefficient.
Oh, yes, it is. It absolutely is.
As a systems analyst, you probably pick them out very quickly. Oh. Naively think we can make it work better. No.
That's not what it's for. Exactly. And I didn't understand it at the time. Yeah. And actually, you know what, from the, it's also hard to spot, because you know what, the lawyers and the judges suffer so much in that system. Mm-hmm. And this is what's so mind blowing. After that case, I discovered that the Supreme Court was actually, live streamed. I think that's something that they started just a few months before that. At least it was only when I was looking into the English legal system that I came across the fact that the UK Supreme Court is live streamed. And that was, I mean, such a treasure trove of information. So I spent almost a year just watching the court cases on this through the live stream. And one of the things that strikes you is just how much hassle it is, to be a Supreme Court judge. I mean, the entire system isn't really set up for ease of use or, to make it efficient. And sometimes they would be extremely frustrated and have, little anger tantrums, So it's, but it's a very good point. And you know what? One of the things that, you asked why on earth I was targeted. And now looking back on my CV and what I did, there were several reasons why I could have been targeted. And I don't know what exactly it was, but I think in reverse, what I was actually doing is by focusing on the problems we have in the world, be that the economy or the financial crisis or the legal system, I was essentially coming up against this big structure, this big cartel and its workings that is causing most of the problems we have in the world, and it didn't matter what I looked at. Was it finance? Was it just economy detached from finance? Or was it the legal system? Was it the city of London? Was it the Russian case? It's all the same. I was essentially, I didn't notice at the time, but I was feeling up the same elephant in the room, if you like,
Or octopus.
Octopus, whatever you want. Yes, maybe octopus is more.
It's called the octopus, yeah. From what I understand. Yeah. But yeah, I know what you're saying. You get the old thing about you're the blind man touching one part of the elephant, telling what it is, and the other guy. They all have different perception of what it is by what they're touching, but no one can see the entire picture. But I think what here you talk the startup company. It's I was in the process of trying this small scale, of trying to bootstrap startup company that would employ this mechanism. Basically, you're trying to get people to get around this entire financial cartel, and you innocently thought you could consult and get people, you could more or less financially plan or help people plan with their finances and with their resources to acquire real wealth, real assets, and to get off from this trap. And you realize the trap isn't it by accident. It was set on purpose, and yes. whoever set that trap is not gonna look kindly upon people who have the mental capacity, the ingenuity, the creativity, and the to devise alternative systems. So, your story is very familiar. I'm going to share something with the experience of Katherine Austin Fitts. Are you familiar with her case?
Oh yes, gosh, okay. I'm a great fan.
Yeah. So I don't have to, how she. She identified all this fraud at HUD, and then she reported on it, and then she found that no one seemed to care. They wanted her to shut up. They pretty much chased her out of Washington, D.C. This is the late 80s under the George H.W. Bush administration. Then she started financial advisory firm. I think it was Hamilton Securities, doing this very thing, and she developed a software, I think, that would allow people to chart and identify all the federal spending in their congressional district. And I think one thing she honed in on was the federal flood insurance or something up in some borough in New York that had never been flooded before. And she just found it all as waste and fraud. And that's when she got the ire of the Bush administration. I think it was still the Bush early 90s, may have been the Clinton administration, but they went after her. She was a victim of sort of this malicious prosecution. But the point there wasn't so much to prosecute her, although they would have tried, but she spent like $20 million winning her case. But that was the whole point, to put her out of business. At the same time, she seemed to experience similar things that you experienced, although I don't think she's ever said she's suffered physical blame, but the whole kind of gang stalking, targeting, manipulation, her email being hacked, her computer systems being taken down daily. This thinking, if you're trying to run a business, much less try to operate a normal life, this makes it impossible, which is the whole point, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And you know what? I think what we're actually discovering now, now through the internet, through, these wonderful interviews and actually hearing these stories, what we're actually doing is we're putting together one big puzzle. And it was essentially, I followed Katherine Austin Fitts when I analyzed finance, because she was one of these people who actually taught me a lot. and I followed her interviews, and I've heard a bit about her targeting. I never realized that. I think she mentioned an assassination attempt on the motorway as well.
That's right. And you had a similar experience, from what I understand.
Oh yeah, I mean, by now I had 3. You know, so it just keeps coming, and it's what it actually is, and this is, I think, what we're now figuring out. You know, Katherine Horton Fitz was at the mercy of this in the US. I was at the mercy of this in Germany and Switzerland. And what we now wake up to it is that this is a decentralized weapon system. And I think this is what Eric Karlstrom also accurately identified. You know, the weapon system has different parts to it. One part of the weapon, which is the psychological warfare weapon, is the gang stalking. It's using essentially psychological pressure and disintegration to disintegrate your courage, your social ties, your maybe mental state, certainly your inner calm, but also to disintegrate you financially. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, these kind of trumped up court cases that Katherine became the victim of, they are part of the weapon system. And then, you know, it has many other parts. It has these roving death squads that Eric Karlstrom pointed out. You know, the same matrix organization that was used by the CIA in Vietnam and Latin America. Mm-hmm. These roving death squads honing in on key people. And eventually, another moving part of this weapon system is this the electromagnetic microwave weapons, you know. Yeah. And there they have, again, mobile units, which they used to attack me when I was driving my car. It also has stationary parts, which seem to be the phone towers, the cell towers, emitting microwave radiation and doing all sorts of stuff. And we now wake up to this fact that it is all one, you know, and everything that, for example, Katherine Horton Fitz was targeted, Karen Hudis, she was targeted so brutally with one of these directed energy weapons in, I think, August, that she had stroke-like symptoms, and simultaneously 2 other people she worked with were equally targeted, you know, and
from what I understand, is some of these weapons, they can actually, I mean, I don't, not from what I understand, because this is, the technical aspect is way above my pay grade here, but I understand is they've developed this sort of skull-to-skull psychic manipulation where they can create, you can put in voices and also sort of delusions, or, you know, so if someone like Katherine Hudis, if you wanted to discredit her, you could make her have thoughts or delusion, or sort of see things that aren't real. Then if she talks about it, she sounds like she's nuts.
Yeah, and you know what they do? Yeah, they do that on different levels. They do it with classical methods where they try to make you read. They send you information and they will, put in disinformation. Uh-huh. That's the old classical way. And I think Karen Hudis certainly fell victim of that, because I remember in the beginning she was going on about how the world is run by coneheads, you know.
Yes, I heard that. And I said, okay, that's it. 50-60% of what she was saying was right on. All of a sudden she started talking about, coneheads in the Vatican. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I think, and then afterwards, she even in an interview, she said, no, a disinformation agent got to me. And at first, if you're an outsider, you have no idea how this can happen. Yes, and she sounds nuts saying it, but actually, it's very interesting how they do it. And I've experienced, knowing that they're trying to do that, I can now look at my email traffic and actually map out when they're trying to do it. So I should at some point publish studies I did on their disinformation campaigns, because it's a treasure trove, They try to feed you information that's true so that you catch on, and then they try to lead you along.
It was Katherine Horton Fitz who claimed that she was offered an introduction to aliens.
Oh, really? Yes. Yeah. And you know what? Actually, the aliens topic is one of the favorite things of the intelligence agencies. And I tell you why. It's because as a systems analyst, I know that something like the alien theme has to be there, because intelligence agencies essentially hire and have to employ a lot of clinical psychopaths. Now, when you do that, that's really dangerous, because these guys are going to tear you apart, right? So you have to somehow brainwash them and keep them under control. And the classic thing that psychopaths will do is and they've done this throughout the ages, is invent something much more powerful than man and claim that they have the power, So, for example, in the olden days, you would have the old priests at temples, right, pretending that they've got some sort of link to deities and that they would somehow represent deities on earth. And this is how, if you manage to get people to believe you're kind of endowed with more power than you could possibly have as a human being. Now, given that these days we don't really fall for that anymore, for high priests claiming that they've got godlike powers, there has to be a modern equivalent, and aliens, because of the films we've been made to watch as teenagers and so on, and because of there being a scientific, possibility that they do exist, that's the next thing. That's the next story that they can tell. And one of the things I discovered is that a lot of agents will actually fervently believe in aliens. By now, I almost use it as a kind of selection filter to tell who's an agent and who isn't. If they actually start talking to me about aliens and I can see no micro expressions or any sort of psychological discord in their face when they talk to me, meaning that there seems to be perfect brainwash, then I'm pretty sure that they work for MI5 or one of the agencies, because I then know that they've been put through a brainwash program, a professional brainwash program that's essentially used to control them.
Yeah.
So and these programs are very, very good. So I stopped laughing at people when they talk about, having met aliens or having been offered an introduction, because these brainwash programs and psychological tricks are hugely successful, But also what I've understood from, reports from agents is that I think they're also conned to believe that there are aliens at these military bases. And the reason why it's important for us to know that is because I think a lot of these people that they label aliens are actually victims of human experimentation.
Yeah, MK Ultra type stuff,
and not just that, actually biological experimentation. For example, there's I think it's either genetic disease or maybe it's something to do with metabolism in the womb. But there's a certain medical condition through which people become very, very large. They essentially develop what's it called, gigantism or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you do medical experiments on people, it's easy to see that you could easily reproduce that, and you could basically have designer babies that have this fault. But then they would be literally giants. So when you see suddenly giants at the military base, you can claim that they're aliens, but at the same time, they're not. They're just victims of human experimentation. Mm-hmm. And I suspect that, a lot of what these MI5 and MI6 and other agents have seen, which they think are aliens, are actually just horrific injuries and horrific deformations of, actual real human beings.
Now, we were talking about Katherine Horton. We're talking about well, first, actually, when you're part of this process is a blacklist that you get on, for which there is no appeal.
Yes, that's right.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, as I should say, I'm still figuring it out, but you can definitely tell that there's a blacklist because essentially your assault protocol, as I described, travels with you across boundaries, across borders. So when I moved from England to Germany, they used the same conditioning triggers and they were acted out by German agents. But it's also much more detailed than that. So you don't really need a house move. You can just take a plane and fly from Switzerland to England. And for example, I went to the UK in October, and that morning I was brutally shot into here in my home in Switzerland. And essentially, one of my neighbors has one of these microwave guns pointing at my house, and I was standing in the kitchen and I was shot in the head. It was agonizingly painful. It was hard pulses to the same point in my skull, or on my skull. And then that day I flew to the UK and I hired a car to travel from London to Manchester. And on the drive to Manchester, I was shot into from a car behind me, but on pretty much the same spot. Literally, and they've got a precision of just a few centimeters, if not millimeters, with these devices. And what that shows you is that they have a set assault protocol, and that can be executed wherever you are. That's what it means, having a decentralized weapon system. And so this means that there's a blacklist that is not just Europe-wide but worldwide, because people report the same thing flying from the UK to Australia. That's the Five Eyes surveillance network, but also going to other places like Thailand and anywhere in the world. So there seems to be some global blacklist. The intelligence agencies have already been known for blacklisting. It's one of those things that they're set up to do. For example, in the UK, there was a huge scandal because they blacklisted people in the construction industry, destroying livelihoods. And that has been rolled up in court cases. So we know that they've done that. There's the no-fly list in the US, which is just ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, you get on sometimes because your name sounds like somebody, and then you can't get off. I mean, what's that?
Oh yeah, it's not even like you're targeted for like more higher scrutiny. They can just keep you from flying, which is really illegal. It's unconstitutional, but because they can just arbitrarily declare you a threat without any due process or appeal. Exactly. It's ridiculous,
Yeah, and the fact that I don't know, is there anybody who managed to get off the no-fly list? I mean, there must have been court cases, but it would be interesting to see how many people managed to get off it.
There was a 5-year-old kid who shared her name with a supposedly terrorist suspect, and I think it took several years to get him off the list. That's how ridiculous it is. And again, part of the process is it's meant to be ridiculous because it's conditioning. The whole TSA thing here in the United States after 9/11, where all these the probing and the strip searching and all these things, and they don't stop anybody, and it's ridiculous. It's also random, so it has no real security benefit whatsoever. But it's there to condition you to being humiliated, and
yes,
that's what it's designed to do.
I completely agree.
I think it was back about 2002 to 2003. Senator Ted Kennedy was put on the no-fly list, and I think he got off it because of the publicity. But it just shows. I think someone just as a joke put him on it, probably. And this is how
probably.
This is how arbitrary it is, because actually someone has to type the name and his Social Security number into the database. And let's do this. And there's not like whoever it is is going to get fired.
Yeah.
Because you think there'd be some never in all that case there was always like Homeland Security did this, as if no individual did it.
Exactly. You put your finger right on the solution here, because the only antidote we have, because what you're describing here, and what my problem is, it can be categorized as complex systems running out of control. Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree with you. They are made to run out of control. They're made to be ridiculous. But then the question is, how do you solve this problem? And the quickest way to solve this problem is to reintroduce personal liability. Yeah. Personal responsibility, and dig out the name. Who was that? Who authorized these things? Who put the name on?
Because you go to the employee, some guy, wearing a tie and a short sleeve shirt with a tie, sitting in his cubicle somewhere. You just picture him typing the name. You did this. He can say, "Well, my supervisor told me to do it." Then the supervisor would go, "Well, my supervisor told me to do it." And all of a sudden, you find out Dick Cheney did it. That's a ladder climb. That's what prosecutors do. Going after drug kingpins or something. Well, do this here. Find out who made this decision. It's a serious issue. It's not funny. It's not funny that you can prevent people from travel or make their lives more difficult, because that's just a stepping stone. But you can do. It applies across the board and all these things. How you could make someone's life impossible. You can fly out to California to visit a family member, and then find out on your return flight that you've been put on the list, and then you're stuck 3,000 miles, and you have to drive across the continent.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of saying, "Look, I have no bombs. Let me get on the plane." No, you're on the no-fly list. You're too dangerous.
Yes,
I'll strip nude for you. You can do anything you want to me. And then you might tempt them. But you're saying, but I'm saying is it's the whole point is to administrative measures, be able to prevent someone from traveling. And if you do that, you can and this goes to what you're saying, you can gradually marginalize them deny them the ability to travel. You can deny them the ability to get employment, because if you're on a list, there's certain companies won't hire you because they have federal contracts and they don't hire terrorists, right?
Exactly.
So there's all. I mean, and pretty soon this process of that no-fly list is an example of disintegration. The Stasi method of disintegration. Zerstong, it's called.
Yes, the Zersetzung, exactly.
It's German. I assume you speak German, right?
Yes, I do.
So I'll let you pronounce it. Yes, but you're right.
But I think you're absolutely right. And you know what we have to realize is that, and this is what because I went through this fast sequence of looking at the legal system and all the problems there, then the financial system. I also looked into white collar crime and companies and how they are run just by studying these human systems. And I discovered that the problems were very similar. They're just one. The second aspect is that they were caused by pretty much the same people. Mm-hmm. The structure, all these things are connected at the top. And this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is actual fact that was revealed in 2011 by a group of systems analysts and mathematicians at ETH Zurich. So anybody who says, the cartel, that's just a myth or conspiracy theory, you just have to answer, no, it's a business plan. It's an executed business plan, because we now know for a fact that I think 40% of all the biggest companies in the world are interconnected and have been interlocked and are controlled by the same super entity. And the way these Swiss mathematicians did it is that they used large databases, so essentially modern software and database analysis tools, to map out the ownership of, I think, 43,000 companies registered around the world. And they discovered that if you looked at shareholders, you wouldn't see the structure. But if you looked at company ownership, and essentially management control, you found that all these companies actually were hanging together in a superstructure. And the way the cartel managed to get all this power was by, as I understand, by just placing directors on several boards, so you have these interlocking board memberships, essentially. So even if you don't own all the shares, you can still hugely influence the decisions, right? Mm-hmm. And these mathematicians mapped out bit by bit how the ownership structure through subsidiaries and so on, if you track it back, you ended up with the same super entity. So they published this paper, which is called The Network of Global Corporate Control. And anybody can read that. It's one of these scientific papers published on freely available. It's called archive.com. So archive is spelled with an X, not .com, .org. So archive, ARXIV.org. And just search there for Network of Global Corporate Control, because that is, I think, the most important paper of the beginning of the 21st century, because it actually proves the existence of this cartel. So from that point onwards, when we say, the banks own everything, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's a factual statement. But when you have a world in that state, it's also clear that these banks own, the arms manufacturers, they own the pharma companies, they have financial volumes that they own governments, and maybe that a lot of governments and, if not all governments, have been turned into companies behind our back, Yeah. They are all registered. So we have these, everywhere these companies and the same structure owning it. So what they can do once they have this sort of control is have business plans that use several of these companies at the same time. So once you own, for example, the intelligence agencies, and you own weapons companies and big pharma, what you can do is you can use your intelligence agencies and the surveillance network to run around with directed energy weapons, shooting at people through the walls of their home, because microwaves pass through the walls of the standard home. You can shoot them up, give them cancer, and then increase the revenue for your pharma industry. And I think there's reason to believe that that's precisely what's happening.
Well, and again, it's a business model, downstream profits, and you can do that with the microwave technology, with the cell phones, where over the course of 10, 20 years of using this stuff, a certain percentage of the population is going to develop cancer from the radiation from these devices that we're all been entrained to require now. It's a necessity now. But it's Katherine Austin Fitts. I was talking. She wrote an ebook. It's called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits. Mm-hmm. And she talks about this is done during the Clinton administration, the 1990s, when they started to privatize prisons. Mm-hmm. Okay. At the same time, they ramped up the drug war, and what they did that by raiding, usually targeting low-income areas, black areas, people that can't afford a lawyer, and they arrest a bunch of young, usually black guys, but I guess women too, but usually black guys, and they'd fill the prisons because the prisons had to have like 90% occupancy for the contract to be profitable for companies like the Corrections Corporations of America. It's actually in their prospectus and in the various contracts that they sign with the states. They require a certain occupancy level in the prisons. Now, what if there isn't enough crime to you go out and you just go and arrest that. At the same time, you also by imposing certain socioeconomic conditions, you can be sure that enough people are going to be dealing pot and doing that. So there's always going to be a pretext for arrest and imprisonment. And these people will plead out because they don't have adequate legal counsel because they can't afford it. At the same time, these people, these warm bodies in the prison cells are not just filling up space. They're going to work for corporations that manufacture things for the military, like Kevlar vests and other things for pennies. So they're being paid pennies. And at the same time, the cost per inmate skyrocketed for the taxpayer. We went from like $8,000 a year to like $24,000 a year. Goodness. So it's just a big wealth transfer scheme. It's a huge, just like the Pentagon, can't account for trillions of dollars. The same thing that Katherine Austin Fitts discovered at HUD, where $60 billion went missing under fraudulent mortgages, money just being taken. And who's involved in that? It's probably the CIA, because they're using that's money for black budget operations. The same way the CIA is involved in drug running, because it provides money for black budget operations. It's also involved in organized crime.
Yes.
So there you go. I mean, it's a business model. It's the same thing with the international drug trade. It has to be illegal because that's how you create the false scarcity and the high prices. But all that has to be put. Where does the money go? It goes into the banking system. It goes to Wall Street. And the story about Dick Grasso beating the FARC guerrillas back in the late '90s, telling them to invest their drug proceeds in Wall Street. And when they decided not to, that's when Plan Colombia went into action, and they started cracking down on that cartel. Because it's a question of going after certain cartels to the benefit of others who are more cooperative or assets of the CIA, of the big banks, of high finance. And the whole economy of drugs is not just the money you get from it. It's a further way to degrade and decompose society, because the drugs themselves destroy the community. And you have a business model. Instead of basing your economic growth model on equity and real wealth gain and improving it in the human condition, you are literally destroying the community through drugs.
Yes.
And Wall Street's invested in this model. The current, everyone who has a 401k plan is invested in this model. And they don't know it. They don't know it.
And you know what? This is why it's just so important to unravel this as quickly as possible, because what this business model actually does is create overall a negative return on investment. But you're not hit in the face with it straight away. It hits you on the rebound. It's
like treating the world like a business. It's like liquidating a business or something. You just that's how they treat the world.
Exactly. But when you've liquidated it, you will have a quick cash burst. But then what do you do then? You
move on. You move on like the Venetians, right?
But the problem is exactly. And you know what? This is I think what we're dealing with are legacy systems, because they what the Venetians did is exactly as you describe, and then they moved on like locusts. But now we have these global corporations. This is a global system. When they're done with us, they can settle on Mars by all means, but there's nothing to be gained there, So I think what happened is that the cartel has been doing copy and paste what they have done for centuries. And they have expanded and become bigger and bigger. Now they actually are global, and now they hit essentially the boundaries of planet Earth. And by continuing with this business model, they are decreasing their own rate of return. They're essentially eating up their own assets.
Could this explain their obsession with transhumanism?
Partially. I think several things explain transhumanism. I think part of it is also essentially symptomatic of the psychopathology of the leadership. It has many traits that actually, reflect one-to-one classic textbook psychopathology. Part of it, for example, is that, psychopaths, they like to control their victims, live out their control. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you will see, you know about serial killers mutilating their victims, right? Destroying their bodies, getting into their bodies. There are also psychopaths who, for example, Harold Shipman, serial killer, he poisoned people. So, you put something into someone else's body as as a sort of extra control, and, they arouse themselves with it. And transhumanism fits into that beautifully, because you put all this technology into people's bodies that you can then use to control them. And by, talking to the victims of the intelligence agencies, it's horrific to realize to what an extent technology can already do that. So we have victims who are reporting that essentially every aspect of their bodily functions is controlled by the radiation in the microchips, and it is scientifically entirely feasible, And some of them have found the microchips, but so certainly pain sensation can be remote controlled, but also breathing, heartbeat, blood flow.
You hear about this, technologists and people who believe in this stuff talk about how some of this technology can be used, to improve health, right?
Yeah, and you also hear that it can make you smarter. But, my argument is the following. If that's true, and it's so amazing, given that the CIA has all this tech, why do we not see these genius CIA agents anywhere? If you mention CIA anywhere around the world, the last thing people will think about is people of fantastic cerebral performance, right?
Oh, I know. Yeah. So, I think you made the point where in the aftermath of 2001, all the intelligence agencies became swelled, and now they're laboring under this burden of morons running around.
Yeah, it's essentially it's a very important point, because it's essentially a physical, it's a system effect, it's a law of physics that you cannot get around. Mm-hmm. You cannot suddenly double your size and keep quality. At Oxford we used to have admissions exams and interviews for admissions. If we suddenly doubled our intake 1 year, quality will have to go down, because they're not, not in the first instance, because, Oxford also pulls intelligent people from around the world. So we'll just pick up more foreign students. But if we kept doing that, eventually the quality will have to go down, because not everybody is, top first class.
Well, look what happened with the universities, particularly here in the United States, after the Second World War, when they issued the GI Bill. And they thought, well, let's give everyone a college education. The only problem is, the college education, at least how it was understood in 1946, only a certain percentage of the population qualified to really really benefit or avail themselves of a college education. There weren't intellectual material for that, if you're going to maintain standards. So in order to get all that money that the government was offering, the university system, they across the board lowered the standards. At least most universities did. It also caused a huge increase in tuition, which we're suffering with today, because obviously, if you offer cheap loans, they're going to cause tuition to go up, and you also increase student debt, which is a whole other part of the system is debt, right? Weaponized debt. But you're right. There's only so many. If you're going to maintain the high standards, there's only so many people in a given population who are going to meet those standards. Yes.
And what's interesting is that, not just the US government, also the UK government has essentially sold higher education as the panacea to all of our problems. Education was, I think, Tony Blair's slogan. And but what this totally ignores is when you look at complex human systems, you don't, what you need is an entire palette of different skills. And academic ability is just one skill.
Yeah.
It's just one ability. And it's almost like, you have an engine, some sort of special machine, and then inside the engine, you have got one type of cog that is, I don't know, maybe diamond coated because it has a high attrition. It's in a high attrition environment. And then you think if you make your entire machine out of those diamond coated, extra hard cogs, you will have the best machine ever. Nonsense. Yes. Because you're trying to build a complex machine and you have just one type of cog. Well, you can't really do very much with that, And it's blindingly obvious when we think about it in terms of engineering. But nevertheless, people seem to think that somehow university educations and intellectual in the classical sense, that sort of academic sort of mental performance is what we just need more of. I mean, I have been through the academic system and I beg to differ. I don't think the world could take many more academics, frankly. We need something else.
I think it was William F. Buckley, the old CIA hand, actually. But anyway, Skull and Bones, he made it, he passed himself off as sort of a, he was a conservative, but he made the famous quip that I'd rather have the country be run by the first 100 names in the telephone book than the faculty at Harvard University.
Absolutely. And
he's right.
He's right. He's right. Because, I've, no offense to my old colleagues, I was at the faculty of, St. John's College, but, and that's because our human life and also public life and anything that we do as humans is hugely complex, anything. That's not just the health system and the education system and anything else like building roads or, getting aeroplanes to fly. Many other things are hugely complex and they take entirely different skills. You could have the best aeronautics engineer, but he will not necessarily be the best nurse. And so on. So to somehow try to purify our society to one type of skill, one type of ability is nonsense. What you will do if you do that is you're going to degrade society. And I think that's exactly what happened in the UK. And you can see that with your own eyes if you go to the UK, because the first thing that will strike you, certainly coming from Germany, is that the plumbing is awful. I mean, I'm not kidding you. It's literally like you go back to the 19th century, And I asked my colleagues, what on earth is going on? Why is, do you not have any good carpenters and people who can sort out your plumbing? And they explained that it was partially because of this trend towards everybody having, a university degree. There's no status in being a plumber, although it's a perfectly honorable pursuit. It's also very, very lucrative from what I understand. Yeah, it's very, and it's bloody needed, certainly in the UK. And what happened is that it's turned into a joke, into a cliche that they imported plumbers from Poland, and carpenters from Poland. Yes, they did, because what their own people had were essentially degrees in horse studies and media studies, not being able to put a nail into the wall.
And certain skills have to be maintained, like any art, or if there's a technique to this, and if that technique isn't supported through the economy, through a market, the skill will be lost. That you'll lose. Good example is if you look at the housing market and how the Federal Reserve of the United States was largely responsible for the housing bubble, and a lot of that was a pump and dump scheme. But as a result, a lot of houses went up. It was just horribly built, the shoddy construction. And if you do that over time, all of a sudden now. It used to be that building a house, you were a master carpenter, you were a master builder. And now, with the way the market was, no one seemed to care about the quality home because you just would live in it for a few years, flip it, and move on. You create a situation where those skills are no longer rewarded, and they become in short supply. And all of a sudden, you have a lot of construction that's ugly. It's it's a transient society now, so no one cares about the way the house looks. It has to sell faster, so it has to be more uniform, so everything's boxy and the same. So this is how markets can really degrade if you distort a market in a certain way, and short-term profit becomes your primary objective. How just aesthetics and quality are the first thing that suffer from that, and you see it everywhere. You see it everywhere. You know?
Exactly. And in a sense, I'm now at the stage where, and you put it so well, you know, exactly this. This is almost like, it should be turned into, I think you just came up with a law of systems analysis, you know, for human systems. As soon as, how did you put it? Quality and beauty suffer.
Aesthetics and
exactly aesthetics. Aesthetics and quality. I should really. I have to write it down after this interview because you're right. You know, I think you can invert this and say as soon as aesthetics and quality suffer, you already have proof that essentially your system is being pulled away from maximum efficiency. There's some sort of effect that pulls it away from its natural optimum.
Yeah.
And typically it's some form of capture in human systems. So someone at the top is trying to execute a business plan, capturing the entire system for their own profit. But in a normal system, that shouldn't happen. You know, normally people don't like to move house. They don't like to just live somewhere and then flip it and move on.
Yeah.
You know, there seems to be some sort of external pressure. And most people don't like to live in shoddy homes.
Yeah. And also they're engaged in a line of work which isn't really productive. Maybe they're engaged in finance, which is really just some form of alchemy, which is a con.
Yeah, it's fraud. I think it's a professional fraud.
Professional fraud. But people internalize this because they don't question things like usury anymore. It's part of the system. They don't question the ethics that the type of system promotes. You know, this goes back to sort of the Whig British system, the Newtonian model of economics, which said that, you know, economics really is a matter of physics. It's not a question of morality. It used to be that economics was a subset of morality. But when the Newtonian revolution occurred in the 17th century in England, and this is all part of it goes back to the Reformation and some of that, but morality became a subset of economics. And I think that's when you're talking about psychopathic systems and what you're dealing with here is this is the rationale, the systematic rationale to what you're dealing with today. These people, where do these psychopaths come from? Where do these systems come from? Where do you get this sort of this institutional or systematic or collective psychopathy? It's because everyone has internalized this way of thinking.
Yes.
You know,
that's another really good point you just made, because I think you're absolutely right. I wasn't aware of this, that they actually try to use physics to justify this, but I think you might be right, because I have seen documents. I don't know which of these, leaked documents it is, where they were trying to use models from physics to try to justify why everybody has to have, why everybody has to be essentially controlled and boxed into one sort of career. Yeah, and you know what? Actually, as a physicist, maybe I should make it my goal to debunk it, because it's a total misunderstanding of complex human systems to even claim that based on physics. And the reason for that is exactly what I outlined, to do with the cogs. So, I've noticed that a lot of the companies are essentially run like the first factories in the Industrial Revolution. They have the same sort of parameters. You measure performance like you would measure performance in maybe a production line.
Yes.
But what this ignores is that if you're dealing with a human system or service company, or even if you just have humans as part of your factory setup, humans are different type of cogs. So in a sense, they have tunable performance. And if you want to get the maximum out of it, as much as you would use a certain manufacturing process to produce a cog of specific hardness, specific high performance, with human beings, you have to have a specific environment for them so that they are high performing. The last thing you can do with human beings is to kind of compartmentalize them and box them in. You actually decrease performance if you do that for psychological reasons. And therefore, if you are running your company, your modern day company, and you're using ideas from the Industrial Revolution, and you're trying to optimize your human beings like you're optimizing, like they used to optimize production lines, you're going to decrease your performance. And I think this is what we see. You get depression, people are boxed into these little cubicles. It's not conducive to human life. And I think what's missing here is a realization, and actually you can also show that using physics, principles, that this is what you need to do. You have to create an environment that gets the most out of people. And we don't have that today. So if you really want to have high performance companies, we have to change that. We have to start developing new principles, and we have to listen to human beings. So you mentioned these psychopaths, and I think the psychopaths are the ultimate reason why that isn't happening. And for the following reasons. So those of your listeners who haven't followed my work, I made a very simple point. I said that all organizations we have are essentially these, if you look at the organigram, if you just Google organigram, you will find always these pyramid hierarchies. They taper to the top. You have one team leader in charge of several people who in turn answers to, a line manager, and so on. And it tapers all the way up until you have one director, a very small board of directors. And if you have this sort of structure, and you just add in one single fact about human beings, which is that 1% are psychopaths, what you essentially will have eventually, if this company or this structure exists for long enough, is an accumulation of psychopaths at the top. For the simple reason that psychopaths have a competitive advantage when they rise to the top, which is their ruthlessness. They don't care about other people's feelings. They're also risk takers. So they will just stab people in the back to get to the top. And they also have this innate need for power and control. And if you have these two components, then it's pretty clear that our biggest and our oldest organizations will have psychopaths at the top, and not just one, but a pretty thick layer of psychopaths, who will then in turn have a psychopathic culture that will color the entire organization. Now, when you have that, you have by default also a leadership structure that doesn't give a damn about the feelings of the underlings, and when they don't care about their feelings, and they have no concept, essentially psychopaths are people who have a module missing in their head. They just cannot relate emotionally to others like normal people can. When you have that, those sort of people will try to extract value from a company by the only way they know how to, which is through pressure, through threats, fear-based, because that's the only thing they themselves respond to. But this is counterproductive for 99% of the population. So I think what we're faced with now is essentially a world where we do have these huge corporations. They are all pyramid organizations. They all have a really thick layer of psychopaths at the top management. And it would never ever occur to the leadership that what they're doing is essentially wrong. It's, and it's because of that they just cannot snap out of it. They cannot adopt any other way of operation, and it is through that they're essentially running the entire planet into the ground. That's my view. And if I'm right, then the question is, what are we going to do about it? Because these people are not going to listen to anybody. They think they are gods. They think they are, everything that they say about the New World Order, and that those people think that they are godlike in the super race. Yes, of course they would be thinking that, because they're, statistically speaking, most likely psychopaths. Mm-hmm. So when we have this situation in the world, it explains why we have all these deaths, all these murders and mutilations and starvation around the world, and the leadership doesn't care. The question is, what are we going to do? What can we do about it? How do you stop psychopaths? Because when you wake up to this fact, you realize, oh my God, it's like being run by, if you're in the UK, you will know about Fred and Rose West, serial killers who killed children and raped them. But take any serial killer, take Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. When you have Jack the Ripper, Hannibal Lecter, and Fred and Rose West running your world, what can you do to stop them? Mm-hmm. You could arrest them. But if they have put their Fred and Rose Wests into the judiciary and the police, I don't want to incite violence, but I think very quickly you realize the only thing you can do is assassinate them. Mm-hmm. Capture them somehow. What are we going to do? And I don't want to kill anybody, but I want the world to wake up and have a serious discussion of what are we going to do, people, to stop these nut jobs. Because they are mentally ill. They are totally insane. What mechanisms do we have to stop them? Because we have to pull those levers quickly. And I think the reason why we have to pull those levers quickly is because these nut jobs are about to kick off a world war. If they can't have world war, they will kick off serious, trouble around the world, and certainly the Western world. And if they can't have that, they will try to kill us slowly through what Catherine Austin Fitts calls the slow burn.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, if you're looking for examples of this, somebody will listen to what you're saying and say, well, that's insane. Give me some evidence. Well, let me present the 20th century to you. Let's go over the 20th century and the true causes of those wars and those revolutions. And if you really look beneath the surface of those events, it's always the elite that are fomenting a revolution, causing international conflict in order to exploit the profit from those conflicts. Or, a good example is, why did Wall Street in London fund the Bolsheviks? Because they wanted to destabilize Russia. And they didn't care how much suffering happened afterwards. In fact, maybe they looked forward to it. There was another objective there, which was genocide, population control. 60 million people died in World War II. Yes. Look at the current situation in Ukraine, where the U.S. is working, to back these neo-Nazis, Yeah. But then you have people like Victoria Nuland, who are here. She herself is Jewish. And she was backing when she was in the Obama administration, these neo-Nazis in the Ukraine. Well, you have to be somewhat familiar with what was going on in Ukrainian politics and history. They're exploiting these local divisions, because it was the SS battalions during World War II who committed some of these atrocities. But the reason why they were committing these atrocities is because many of the executioners in the Ukraine under Stalin were Jewish. So these were reprisals in many people's mind. This is what happens. But the point is, at the same time, they're sending in their NGOs into Ukraine, and they're throwing out the Russian, putting in Yatsenuk, who's this Western stooge, to throw out the government that was pro-Russian. You have Joe Biden's son negotiating some deal for his energy company with fracking.
Yeah.
So they're profiting off the destabilization. They want one thing. You want to push Russia out, of that area, take control of that area, and profit off the destabilization, whether it's cheaper resources. And the same thing you see played throughout Africa under neo-colonialism. Since the age of decolonization of the 60s, the West pursued a different approach. The Western powers pursued a different approach. They ruled by proxy. Instead of directing and administering these countries, they said, we'll give you this fake independence, one man, one vote, one time, put in our stooge, and from here on in, we'll foment revolution, like in the Congo, the Great Lakes region. We'll send in the weapons. We'll put in these various leaders that will carry out genocide from time to time. In the meantime, we'll get access to all the resources on the cheap because you're too disorganized, to defend your rights.
Yes.
One way you can do this has been played out, if you look in Ireland, what the British did in Ireland in the 17th and 18th century is they more or less dispossessed all the Irish. Many of the Irish came to the United States. Many of them worked in the factories on the cheap here in the factories. Much of the factory system, you alluded to the factory system in England. Well, that was enabled by the enclosure movement and the destruction of the commons. So you had what they called paupery, right, in England, and all of a sudden you had this idle urban population that you could send out into the empire, or you could work in your factories for cheap because their way of life had been destroyed. And for centuries they lived off the commons, and there were the monasteries, and this goes back to what Henry VIII and the raiding, the destruction of the monasteries, and there was a whole alternative system of economics and common welfare, general welfare, that was destroyed and replaced under the name of what we call capitalism and property. And this developed the Whig system of economics, the Newtonian Adam Smith world, which they developed this entire intellectual system to justify the theft, that occurred and the dispossession that occurred. So it's well embedded in the West genetic code now, this whole system of psychopathy and exploitation. The whole idea of cheap labor. Look what in here in the United States we had the trade agreement with Mexico, which destroyed Mexican agriculture, because now the United States could import subsidized crops into Mexico, meaning that taxpayers are being paid, are being taxed to buy crops off these large agribusinesses, and then they can send it into Mexico on the cheap. Okay, this destroys local agriculture, which sends labor up north, which creates cheap labor here in the United States.
Yes, it's exactly. It's such a wonderful summary. I absolutely. It's quite breathtaking having it summarized so eloquently.
Then they say, well, what are they going to do? They're going to work they're going to work for 5 cents an hour, making tennis shoes, but otherwise they'd starve to death. Yeah, but you've kicked them off their ancestral homelands, kept them from owning property like United Fruit Company in Guatemala, things like that. And now you're saying, you wonder why they're poor. And otherwise, many of these people they'd be subsistent farmers, maybe even some surplus crops, and they'd live on small farms perhaps, and they'd have their life. And it may not be the life that people in the United States think is a nice life, but it'd be a stable, nice life. It'd be very calm and very stable. But no, they've been constantly destabilized.
Yes.
And at the same time, it adds to the politics, because you start a civil war in Syria, and then you organize you facilitate the refugees that come to Europe and destabilize places like Germany. All of a sudden, you can do a lot with that. You can destabilize Europe, and what does that do to the U.S. dollar if the euro is weakened? So there's all types of reasons why you might want to destabilize Europe, because you want to prop up the dollar for a few more years or something. And these people think this way. At the same time, you have people like Peter Sutherland. We have Wesley Clark, the former head of NATO, saying that the ethnic-based European country is no longer legitimate. It has to be ended.
I think at that point that man has to be court-martialed and just shot in the head.
Well, who is he to say that?
Yes, who is he to say that? And literally, you know what? I think if we look at history, maybe we should look at how many times people were just hung, drawn, and quartered for treason. Because I think treason has gone out of fashion in the judicial system. Seriously.
Yeah.
There's a reason why every single country has, the offense of treason. Because people will always develop business plans to just steal from everybody else.
Yeah, and here's a good case study, Wesley Clark, how these people profit off human misery. He oversaw the assault on Yugoslavia in the 1990s, Serbia, the war. Now, that country was systematically taken apart by NATO and the United States. It was taken apart. Congress even passed an aid bill that made foreign aid contingent on the states of Yugoslavia seceding from Serbia. So this was foreign intervention in the domestic politics of this country. Whether it would have stayed together after Tito for a long time, I don't know. But the point is, it was taken apart. But as head of NATO, he oversaw the bombing campaign in the late 1990s. He is now, I think, a member of a board of a company which is now profiting off I think it's the rare metals or something, the minerals in Yugoslavia. And Madeleine Albright is also a CEO or on the board of a company which is negotiating the privatization of I think it's Serbia's telecommunications industry.
This is, oh gosh, this is so interesting to listen to you because, you summarized it so eloquently. And what you did is essentially you just, mapped out these essentially big complex systems and their natural dynamics, And the question is, when we've identified this, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. I think, well, you got to identify it. And the problem is not enough people are even aware of it. And so you can't do anything until there's a sizable minority, and it's always going to be a minority that takes care of these things. To take care of this, you need an irate minority, but it needs to be talked about because it is a business model. If you go into a country, okay, and you create a civil war or you get another country to invade that country and all that, you start a war, all of a sudden that country, because now it's weak and collapsed, you can go in, you can exploit the people, whether it's labor, you have human trafficking, sex trafficking, usually with girls and children, okay? Men become drug dealers and arms traffickers, okay? And this is thought out. And it even goes as so far as possibly organ harvesting.
I think so. I think absolutely, yeah.
And from the sort of the Manchester school Whig mentality, it makes sense because I was listening. There's a case with this micro lending. You've heard of micro lending?
Yes.
You're aware of the scam?
I not yet. No, but
it's usury. It's basically usurious loans, and they go in. They loaned out money for women like in Haiti to buy sewing machines so they could make clothes.
Oh, I see.
And it's really high interest. The rates are really high, so now the women end up putting their children to work to pay off the interest on the loan, or selling the children off into the sex trade.
Oh my goodness!
And this also occurred in India in the 80s.
I'm not. You know what? I'm not surprised to hear that. This seems like exactly the same business model as the payday lenders in the UK, which exploded after the financial crisis. Mm-hmm. The payday lenders, that's exactly as you say, the sums are piffling, like £20 or £50 just to last people to the end of the month until they get their paycheck. Mm-hmm. Because people are so at the bottom of their, their income now, scratching really the bottom of the barrel. And then if you can't pay that back within a month, that sum can just go up by a factor of 10.
Yes.
So if you're short by £20 one month, then you have to pay back £200 the next month. And it was very interesting because some of these loans have interest rates of 3,500% and things like that. Mm-hmm. And there was there's something called Dragon's Den, popular TV show in the UK, where essentially normal people can pitch their ideas to these entrepreneurs and then they decide if they invest or not. And those are the dragons. And one of the dragons is a successful businessman. And on another TV show, he was, which was essentially about austerity and poverty in the UK, he was presented the contract for one of these payday loans. And his eyes just boggled looking at the interest rate. And he said, well, I'm pretty good at, figuring out contracts and loans, but I cannot tell you what this even means. For me, if I try to borrow money at 3,500% interest, how screwed am I going to be if I'm a week late? Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable. So this is just another example of a system that's hostile to life. And you're right, it's designed to be. And there are all these horrific examples around the world. And sometimes what I noticed is that they seem to be guinea pigging business plans, particularly ruthless business plans abroad. For example, I think these microcredits might be one of them.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, they execute them also in the Western world, when they honed it. And they know how to get around the regulatory framework of a Western country. Mm-hmm. So to all the listeners, I would say that, even if we talk about any sort of organ harvesting and child trafficking or micro lending and usury somewhere in Haiti or Thailand, don't think you're immune, because this will be coming to a town near you, or a street near you before you know it. Mm-hmm. And now I'm in the situation where I am literally in a concentration camp. I'm being shot to pieces by a psychopathic system that has lost any sort of sense or purpose. And I realized that, I also am in touch with so many victims every day who what they're going through is essentially an extermination program.
Well, off call, when we were talking before we started recording, I asked you about why you were targeted. You actually went through a pretty good list of, why someone might be targeted. Do you want to go through that?
Yeah, so for anybody who doesn't know about this, so we started talking about my targeting, which was just stalking and the classic surveillance work that the intelligence agencies do. And we talked about the blacklists. And what many people don't know is that once you're on a blacklist, you're put through a program. And in the beginning, it's just stalking until they mapped out your social network and your responses. And then they try to sabotage you and your businesses to keep you poor so that, you can't sue, you can't afford a lawyer. They try to break up your social circle to keep you really isolated. And then eventually you'll get up to the most ruthless phase. And that's the last stage, which is where you are essentially you will have weapons tried out on you. Which are these modern microwave weapons, but also nanotech and pathogens might be put into your food or pumped through your letterbox into your home. And in this final stage, people are literally used as human guinea pigs to the point of total attrition by the intelligence agencies. And we have now uncovered that, I mean, I'm not the only person complaining about this. There are thousands of people publicly complaining about this on YouTube and Twitter. So anybody who doubts the existence of this phenomenon can just search for targeted individual. That's the moniker, for these people. Mm-hmm. And then the question is, if it's the first time they started attacking me with microwave weapons, it was horrific. And just to explain what that is and how that's done, I mean, how it's done is very simple. You have essentially a microwave gun. So I always use the example of a standard kitchen microwave. You probably know that if you put meat into the microwave, if you turn it up, if it's a sausage and has a high water content, it will just burst. Mm-hmm. If it's meat and fairly dry, it will burn up, and you can even charcoal meat. So it's just dependent on the water content, what the end state will be. But it's pretty harmful, and that's just your standard microwave. And my microwave, for example, cost me 20 euros, so it's really cheap. Now, if you strip away the actual, the actual container or the cavity, the microwave cavity where you place your food, that's just essentially an empty room where you can put food in. If you just strip that away and open the back of a microwave, and you just look at the size of the little emitter that generates the microwave, it's so small it fits into your hand. And that thing, if you take away the cladding, works just the same. That the cladding, the actual chamber around the microwave, is actually just there for your own protection. It's meant to keep the microwaves in. So even when you have, the transparent panel on the front, if you look carefully, there's some sort of black meshing. Mm-hmm. That's metal meshing that essentially absorbs the microwaves, so that the size of the meshing is matched to the wavelength of the radiation emitted, and that's what keeps it in. So it's exactly the same thing when you go to a cinema, for example, and some cinemas have got shielding so that you don't have a mobile phone signal. And you can either have this room entirely covered in metal, or you use meshing. And if you match the meshing size to the mobile phone, so the actual emitted frequency, you can essentially block radiation. So this is why a microwave doesn't kill you. If it doesn't have any leakage. But if you strip away this cavity and you have this little emitter, you have essentially an assault weapon. And I don't try this at home because you will kill yourself. But if you operate that little emitter, you can put it up against a wall and kill somebody on the other side. And that's because most building materials don't absorb microwaves very well. They're essentially transparent to microwaves. And if you have, for example, a brick wall or concrete or something like that, 50% of the radiation will pass straight through. So, of course, the military figured this out. And the advantage with microwaves is that they are, you can't smell them, you can't see them. It's not visible light. It's a frequency we can't see. But it has all these biological effects, And now the military developed these microwave weapons. And essentially, these weapons are emitting a focused collimated beam of microwaves or sometimes pulsed shots. And you can literally point it at a house wall and shoot a pulse, and it will pass through the wall and essentially shoot somebody on the other side of the wall. Okay, so and these things, just like your microwave, building these things is dirt cheap. Okay, so anybody with half a brain knows that once you've got a device like that, you have a big fat problem. Because what this means is that you can kill somebody inside their own home without leaving traces. There are no bullet holes in the wall. And the person can be made to have a heart attack. You can make inner organs explode, just like the sausage in the microwave. You can cause brain damage, cancer, anything. And it seems to be the case that the intelligence agencies put people on a blacklist, and now they're shooting them to bits using microwave weapons, other electromagnetic weapons, and they are targeting people inside their own home. And if you don't know about this technology, what the victims report sounds so incredible. But if you know about the technology, it's blindingly obvious that that's what people would try, that's what people would do. They would just pick up test guinea pigs, test objects for cheap by just aiming it at a random house wall and then just picking someone at random. So that's what's happening. And that's what's happening to me. That's what my stalking and harassment turned into. It turned into systematic mutilation. And I experienced things like that when I was in Munich. And when we moved to Switzerland, this just exploded. And it exploded when I was trying to start my second business, which is trying to launch a consultancy, for complex human systems. And they didn't like that. They literally took me to bits as soon as I got going. But now we have the situation that it's not just me who's experiencing this. We've got thousands, if not hundreds, thousands of people across Europe.
You seem to suggest that this might factor into, the use of the internet, of course, but this sort of profiling that can be done now, mass profiling, because by identifying higher functioning, creative people who pose a threat to the cartel, someone like yourself or Katherine Austin Fitz, hopefully a mediocre person like me is no threat to the system.
I think you're a bigger threat than you realize.
So
I should not say that.
I know, yeah. But you're
a bit too clever.
But but you could also be random, because we'll see if this works. Let's see if we can find a guinea pig. So it's like person over there, and we have to keep doing it. See if we can. How do they respond to gradual torture? How do they respond? Would they just die of a heart attack? So it can be completely random, or you could cut someone off in traffic one day, and that person might know somebody who can make your life miserable, or you might have an ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend who knows somebody.
Exactly.
And it's just, and if that's how these systems operate, because often when you have these these secretive or these cryptocracies or intelligence agencies or law enforcement agencies that have no accountability, or they have broad powers now to keep us safe, this type of abuse happens. Because just say you're in this agency and you covet someone's wife or someone's girlfriend, and you want to get rid of her boyfriend or rid of her husband. What do?
Exactly.
That's old. That's old. That's been going on for whenever. Or if you have a girlfriend who wronged you, you think wronged you, or you're broke up with you because you're a psychopath.
Exactly. This is exactly what actually happens. But what's interesting is that when you think about it, you realize, as soon as you have these sort of weapons, of course it's going to start happening, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what will first start happen. So people at first think, okay, I will just get rid of the people I hate the most in my life. And that will start happening. And then after a while, people think, hang on, can I think of a way to make money with this? And then they will come up with creative business plans. So that's when they will get rid of business competitors, or they will try to give people cancer at certain times, And if you actually look at current events, you have sometimes incidences where political leaders develop very viral cancer, just, timed perfectly, Exactly. And but then as time goes on, the business plans will become bigger and bigger and bigger, They will use established methods, they will get away with it. And to answer your question of, why did I get on this list? I have no idea. I mean, there's many reasons as long as my arm, I could be because I tried something creative, because I went up against the cartel's wishes by trying to make people independent and healthy and wealthy. And so on and so on. I could have also been picked randomly. There was also a sexual element in my stalking and harassment. So these old guys seem to actually get off on this. And I might have been trafficked. So there's a huge business whereby victims are essentially trafficked for the pleasure of sadistic and psychopathic men, who can then use victims on these blacklists and essentially watch them being mutilated to death.
Oh, so like a snuff film.
Yeah, exactly. A really snuff movie where you can be your own director. You can direct what's being done to the person. So there's certainly evidence for that happening. But then, if you think about it in terms of systems analysis, you think, hang on, at some point there must be also really big business plans. So what can we do with this sort of system? And that's when you start thinking, hang on, we could have a big decentralized weapon system using these microwave weapons. And that's exactly what Eric Karlstrom identified, and then you can go one level up. And then you can think, hang on, can I use this sort of weapon system to maybe destabilize entire countries or maybe entire continents? And can I do it such that the people I'm about to screw don't notice it, And the answer is yes. And that's essentially what you were referring to. That's what I pointed out in an article recently, that in my view, having now listened to many, many victims and having tried to map this out, I think what I'm seeing is exactly what Katherine Horton saw. She saw that these drugs, they were not there by accident. You first start off analyzing drugs and you think, of course, people turn to drugs when the financial system turns down, they get depressed, so they want to anesthetize, they'll turn to drugs. And then you see more and more of these cases. Then you realize it's an entire community. Then you see more and more communities. And at some point you realize, oh my God, this is a really big business plan here, Mm-hmm. And if we're wondering of what could this business plan be, right now, I would say that this is now an actual controlled demolition of our Western societies. And you mentioned, for example, these big databases, and we now know that all our information is being pooled, our social media data, our emails, our bank information, our health information. It's all being pooled in big databases. But if you collate all that data, what you can do using, and this is essentially using modern software, big database analysis tools, what you can do is map out an entire society and identify who the really key people are in a society. And this knowledge can then be used to implode a society in a way that no one notices. And I think this is right now what's happening. And you need essentially these complex databases and complex software tools for that, because only when you really have all this information can you do proper analysis and spot the key people. For example, to give you an example, when you have a normal company, most company bosses do not know who their best employees are. They don't know who their most useful employees are. And that's because they're stuck in this pyramid hierarchy. And if you ever worked at a big company, you probably came across situations where someone else got the promotion and the most useful guy in the office was just left out. Mm-hmm. And that's because the boss cannot see who the most useful person is. However, if you now look at all the company emails that are bounced around, useful people get approached by their colleagues a lot more because everybody runs to them for help. So as soon as you analyze a company and you look, for example, at email traffic, you'll realize that email flow seems to be going to key people. If you wanted to destabilize a company because your business competitor, what you could do is then identify the person who is most useful in your competitor's company. If you had access to all the emails, say, because your friends were in Intel, you could look at all the emails, identify their prize employee that's maybe not even known to the head of the company, and give them cancer or make them die in a car accident. Now, that's just a company. The point is you can do the same thing for an entire country. And, the head of a business, most of the time, sometimes people get the sack and they are the most useful person in the company. And then the boss is surprised that the share price drops or that his company tanks, because he didn't know how useful this person was. The same thing happens, or even more so, happens on a country level. If now a foreign power or foreign entity, maybe not even a nation state, but let's say some sort of global cartel, wanted to really implode an entire nation, they could do the same thing using these big databases and all the information about us. They could silently identify who the really, actually, genuinely useful people are in a society. Who are the people who are really the important cogs? And that's not always the people at the top. Those are not celebrities. Those are not politicians. There are sometimes really quiet people who just work very hard, or they are very outspoken. They have a voice that people just resonate with naturally, a way of speaking that their voice really carries. And you can see that if you analyze these big data sets. But unless somebody knows that person, they might not even know their real importance within the system. So now I have, come across the system where I'm being targeted. I have discovered that thousands and thousands of people across the Western world are being targeted. And when you try to spot a pattern, why are these people targeted? It's not so easy. Some are whistleblowers. Some seem to be, sexual interests of somebody in the intelligence agency or someone connected to that. Other people have been picked at random, But then if you use systems analysis, you think, hang on, there's this really big business plan. If you wanted to really do pretty much what, as you mentioned, for example, London and the US trying to implode Russia, or bankers trying to implode Russia to asset strip Russia, say. And, the Second World War was also a form of asset stripping. That business plan was already known at the time. So, for example, the Gestapo, when they, asset stripped Poland or, went into Poland, they identified the intellectuals ahead of time. So by the time the war kicked off, they had already killed them off. So should anybody want to asset strip the entire Western world this time round, they could identify all the really useful people, the people who can organize, the people who are very useful in communities and are loved by many people, so many people listen to them, useful employees, and so on and so on, and they could silently target them. So we would expect to see this explosion in the number of targeted people. And only the people who've analyzed the databases would know the pattern. Only they would know how useful these people are. To anybody else, it would look like randomly targeted people. Some of them have got very high integrity. Others are just very hardworking, But no one who has really analyzed the entire complex system of a nation would know that actually those people are the key cogs, And then meanwhile, you have your intelligence agencies, which have expanded very quickly in recent years. So therefore they are staffed by utter imbeciles. At the same time, they're very ruthless, psychopathic people out to make a lot of money. You could, of course, recruit them to target these people. They're not going to ask any questions. And even if there was any head of intelligence who actually wasn't a traitor, that's, hard to believe, but maybe that exists. He might not even spot that this is what's being done. He might be told that, we're just trying out new weapons and nanotechnology, and we need some guinea pigs, as you know. But it's for the benefit of your country. It's for your national security. And this is how you can actually pass it off and get even dedicated heads of intelligence, even the people who are dedicated to national security. You can make them buy this. You can make them buy their own demise.
Well, that's what we do. I mean, a good example is the people that actually buy drugs.
Yeah,
they're paying for the people who think they're rebelling against the system by using drugs. Actually, you don't realize you're funding the system, the heroin and these things. That's the CIA's doing that. All the people who were taking heroin in Berlin in the 70s were funding a CIA operation. The more benign example of that would be just using platforms like Facebook. The fact that well over 90% of all purchases now are done digitally through credit cards or debit cards. So all these transactions are immediately monitored, processed, sold off the big data, and used for intelligence or same thing marketing. Through big data, through this huge thing, all this information is now being absorbed and being sent out to Bluffdale, Iowa, or something where that NSA place is. The Pentagon, places like the Pentagon or NSA, they can game the entire world. They can more or less apply game theory or modeling. They can model the world, create a false model of the world, and through all this data, predict activity, predict behavior, and you can get predictive. You can get the idea of Philip K. Dick's novel, or Future Crime, where you can predict who's going to commit a crime and who isn't, and all that. But the big purpose, the big function here is being able to know everyone's preference, lifestyle, predilections, thoughts, just through some sort of complex algorithmic study of all this data. It isn't like you have analysts handling each person, case officer. No, it's all done digitally. But should someone present themselves to be a problem, then you can get their file and then act upon it. So we're all being recorded now. All your phone messages, all your emails, everything's being recorded, and no one does anything about it, despite the fact that it's all illegal. At least it's illegal here in the United States. It violates the Fourth Amendment, but our government has never followed its own constitution. Parchment promises are worth the paper they're written on, because no one's ever prosecuted.
And I think that's a telltale sign, because as soon as you have a government with a constitution, and the government doesn't follow the constitution, what this means is that the government is already in deep capture.
Yes.
So
that's a term. Deep capture. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So in a sense, if we start with capture, what is capture? The definition I like is the most, because it's the most neutral and easiest to understand, is if you have a human system, let's say a company. If the company, let's say an employee is corrupt, then he will not do what he's meant to be doing, but he will try to get his personal benefit. So what he will do is capture that part of the organization that he has control over. Maybe he will divert money, maybe he will just, try to get a personal benefit, or maybe if he's just lazy, he will be captured by his own laziness and just not do the work, whatever it is. So capture in its broadest definition is just a part of an organization that is not behaving as it should do based on what it says on the tin. So when you have, for example, the CIA, and it's meant to be fighting terrorism and fighting crime, but instead it's running organized crime and it's, importing drugs, that's clearly captured, I mean, that's pretty obvious. So it's captured by ulterior motives, by other interests. And that happens at the smaller scale. So, if you have just a kiosk, with one employee, if the employee is, helping himself or herself to money, that employee captured, that business or that part of the business. Okay, so that's just capture. As soon as something isn't behaving the way it should, it's captured. When you have, corrupt people migrating to the top, as soon as they have senior leadership positions, really embedded in the organization with huge amounts of power, that's deep capture. It just means that, they are particularly deeply embedded in the management structure, very high up. So they have captured the organization at the highest level. And deep capture in human systems is a huge problem, because in pyramid systems it arises naturally, because there's just so much power at the top. So as soon as you've got a corrupt person or a psychopath at the top, he or she will capture the entire organization. But it's also very dangerous, because once a system is in deep capture, it cannot recover by itself, because it would require the corrupt people at the top getting rid of themselves. They're not going to do that. So once a system is in deep capture, it will stay in deep capture. Once you have a corrupt person at the top, he will not allow any employees with high integrity to come anywhere near his operations, in case he will be discovered. So at the country level, what this means is that if a country enters deep capture by organized crime or corrupt elements, it will stay in deep capture henceforth. So if, as you said, if the United States had a constitution and it didn't follow it from day one, it means that the people who were there founding the government, forming the government from day one, were already captured. If they were captured back then systems analysis tells us that the system cannot recover by itself. So unless there was some sort of external force applied, which there wasn't in the US, it means that it's still in deep capture. There we go, And when, for example, Karen Horton says that the US is in interregnum, and this just keeps being extended, well, that's what we would expect, right? Because It was in deep capture. It's still in deep capture. But it also tells us that if we don't do something absolutely drastic, it will stay in deep capture henceforth. And the current trajectory is that these people are all mentally ill and proper mad, and they want to kill everybody. So what they will do is kill everybody unless we do something drastic. There we are. That's deep capture.
Well.
Yeah, it's quite, when you think about it this way, you also realize, oh my God, it's one of these oh shit moments, as I call it, It's like, holy cow, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do, people? How are we gonna stop this? And actually, on a more positive note, there are things you can do, and you can use systems analysis to figure out what you can do to get rid of deep capture. You can recapture the system, for example, bottom up. That's a very slow process, but it's the most enduring. And what that means is you have to essentially get rid of corrupt officials one by one. You have to exert incredible pressure on every single corrupt official or corrupt unit to change their ways, and then work yourself up. That's the most, the slowest and the most enduring form. Then there's also foreign conquering. If an external big power comes in and essentially just assassinates your top leadership and imposes something else, that works too. That's the quickest way. But this is a serious point. So now it's not just the US in deep capture, it's every Western government. What are we going to do? If an external power comes in, that would be China or Russia, or probably China. That's not going to be nice.
No, it's you're assuming the external power has some sort of benign intent.
Yeah.
And usually the fact that they've invaded means they don't have benign intent. They're not coming in to liberate people. And despite that's what the U.S. claims it does, right? It goes abroad to destroy monsters and to invade and liberate people.
And that's because the invading power is most likely in deep capture themselves.
Yeah.
So now the bottom line is, if we don't want that to happen, then literally we all have to essentially SWAT up on systems analysis, and we all have to SWAT up on our civic duties, and we have to start not organizing ourselves in forming organizations with leadership, because that can be captured. No, what I mean is we have to start acting. We all have to self-organize, identify problematic areas, and then essentially literally use our free time and our own resources and our own money to recapture our systems. And we have to do it for our survival.
Mm-hmm. And the first step of that is just simply acknowledging the problem.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Very few people, don't want to be, woken up from their slumber, or if they're, they're, at least here in the United States, they don't, they're too busy being entertained and amused, or just working to afford the creature comforts they've come to accept are their birthright, to deal with these things. They're, day to day, you raise you have kids, you worry about paying tuition, or keeping the roof over their head, and other than that, how do you find the time or the energy, or even just the psychological wherewithal to deal with it? That's the biggest, I think, obstacle there, is getting people to acknowledge this reality, because the whole meme of conspiracy theory has been created to marginalize all those people who actually look into these things. The whole idea, I use the term business model. If you don't like conspiracy, conspiracy is just two or more people planning to do something immoral or illegal in private. And if you don't think that goes on in politics or in banking or finance, then you're really naive. You know, but again, most people see themselves or understand as somewhat benefiting from the system still, and
and it's because that's because the system is so good at creating illusions. Because in a sense, we stopped benefiting from it long ago. We just didn't notice that we're already being poisoned.
Look around.
We're already being
I mean, that's where Katherine Horton fits, her tapeworm economy thing, and that's what it is. Her idea of the popsicle index, And basically, as the if you look at Wall Street or the Dow Index, as that's grown, life in America quality of life has gone down. And I'm not talking about gadgets and we all have flat screen TVs and nice little gadgets, and I'm talking about the overall quality of life. Meaning is the idea. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to go run free and play with my brothers and be gone for hours, and no one seemed to worry about it. That's considered neglect today because the apparent threat. I think a lot of it's psychological warfare. Is they create the fear that it's menacing out there, so parents don't let their kids develop properly anymore. They're helicopter, they're called helicopter parents, and the kids no longer know how to cope, to deal with conflict resolution anymore. So they go off to college and they become social justice warriors, or they're diagnosed. They go to college with a bad education, and they're in a strange environment, and they have problems coping, and they're diagnosed as having a psychological disorder, and they're put on psychotropic drugs. These things. And that gets back to your business model, the pharmaceutical industry, where they want to pathologize all the normal behavior, all the normal reactions to this. Some of this, you're reacting to a crazy system. You're not crazy. The system's crazy. You're just reacting to it, okay? Whether it's, stress or depression or whatever. But they pathologize normal behavior, and they've normalized pathological behavior. And that's an inversion we're seeing today. So,
absolutely. And now the question is, because if we don't do anything, it's not going to stop. This is essentially the system trend. This is free fall. The system trend is to continue until it hits rock bottom. And also the system inversion, what it brought about is that it catapulted and promoted absolute idiots and serious criminals and pedophiles and serial killers into the upper and in the upper echelons.
Look at politics. This is how Hillary Clinton can cackle at the death of Gaddafi, or can coldly plan out these wars. And what we got with the WikiLeaks was with her, I think it was what was his name? They had an email where they're talking about Gaddafi's gold hoard. And how this war in Libya is going to be started. The civil war that they created is being waged so they can steal his gold. At least that's one of the reasons. This is asset stripping. That's how they look at it. And basically, she was farming out the resources of the CIA, NATO, to these various financial interests abroad, so she could get donations into her foundation. Yeah. That's complete psychopathic behavior, corrupt and illegal, by the way, blatantly illegal, and yet no prosecution, no investigation, no criminal investigation, really.
Yeah, and it's now it shows how captured our systems are, that they can do that so publicly. I mean, the same with the intelligence agencies. There was an open memorandum to Donald Trump after his inauguration, which is downloadable from my website, just begging him to essentially stop the intelligence agency death squads and concentration camps. Also, WikiLeaks Vault 7 has a document that shows that already 10 years ago in 2007, thousands of people were begging to have essentially not be murdered by the intelligence agencies. It's all public now, and they cannot stop. I personally put out 6 public appeals to the intelligence agencies involved in my mutilation directly, and they still cannot stop themselves.
This is the Phoenix program. Doug Valentine has done. I interviewed him a couple times, and we talked about the Phoenix program. And this is the domestic application of the Phoenix program. And Department of Homeland Security, its model was the Phoenix program in Vietnam, and also the Stasi. Marcus Wolf advised. Marcus Wolf, the Stasi head honcho, and after the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall came down, he came west as a consultant. Isn't that comforting? And and he helped develop the Department of Homeland Security.
It's like total psychopath, an actual total criminal. And now, I mean, the only question is, because we now don't have any more time, essentially the best and brightest have been identified. They are literally dying, out of our food supply is being poisoned. I keep trying to explain to people how little time we have left, but they don't understand, because they do not understand non-linear processes. They don't understand. So, for example, a financial collapse is highly nonlinear. One day, 1 week, everything looks fine, and then 2 weeks later, it looks like Argentina.
Yeah. Yeah. And it happened in Argentina.
It happened in Argentina, right? So, and by the time it happened in Argentina, it happened, n number of times around the world. So that's a nonlinear process. But in a sense, finance is entirely artificial. You can literally put a gun to somebody's head and say, stop that, and they can stop it,
Yeah.
So that is an entire artificial explosion. For example, an atom bomb, that's a nonlinear process. By the time the nonlinear part kicks off, you can't stop it. It's physically impossible. Mm-hmm. Everybody within 50 kilometers will die within a second. There's nothing you can do. And I'm just trying to say that with our food supply and our ecosystems and the fine balance that drives that, that is also a nonlinear process that is now tilting. And it's tilting fast, and there is a point of no return. And the ecosystems are things where you cannot put a gun to anybody's head, not even the entire Fed and cartel holders, and say, solve this problem now, stop it.
Yeah,
they can't. So that's the there the laws of physics really kick in, and that's what we have to really keep our eye on.
Well, I mean,
but we can't.
Ordinarily, people would design systems, first of all, that wouldn't be so centralized, so they wouldn't be so fragile. One thing is simple things like the food supply, where you would think nationally there'd be a local market for food, right? I mean, just so if there's one problem somewhere, it doesn't cause a global problem. But we devised these distribution systems, transportation, supply routes, supply chains. These things are very fragile, and they require a certain particular, conditions for them to be able to continue supplying the food that everyone becomes used to. But you can see where people have realized this, and they've devised things like, well, maybe we shouldn't be so dependent on the center, on corporations. So they develop things like farmers markets, and they try to revitalize local food markets and farmers, or they buying milk from a local dairy, and it's not the what do you call it? It's the not the pasteurized milk. It's the local milk. These things. But another thing is this is what Agenda 21 is all about, and this goes back to this whole centralized system, or Agenda 21. Part of Agenda 21 is getting rid of the rural areas, rewilding, and getting people into cities dependent on these systems themselves. So they don't want any independent areas. But laws against collecting rainwater. So you depending on local water supply, centralized water supply systems, which are tainted, with fluoride and whatever. But the fact that they tell people they can't collect rainwater.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think. I mean, that's like Louis XVI when he's called the Sun King, because he could tax people on windows because he brought the sun in. So,
yeah.
But it's almost like to prevent it. There are people who've tried to go off grid and they get arrested.
Yeah.
For having their own electrical system, own water supply system, and these things. Now, I'm not saying we can all live by that, but that's just an example. My point is that systems don't have to be so centralized. You don't have to be a Luddite and reject all benefits of modern civilization, but at the same time, you can devise it in a way that isn't so riddled, so vulnerable to collapse. And it seems to me the system is designed for that very thing. It can, on a turnkey, it can be collapsed if you want to create those social conditions.
I think that's entirely the point. Exactly. The systems have been designed such that they have fundamental flaws that can be triggered. Absolutely. And this has been carefully designed over decades. And then the question is, why? Why would they do that? And if when would they want to use it? And I think the time is now.
Well, hopefully maybe there's a faction. Like I said, when you're talking about this cartel or elite, that no grouping of people are monolithic. And perhaps there's an element within this group which wants to, who aren't quite as insane, and they realize. A good example is public health. Public health and public sanitation didn't really get public support or broad-based support among the wealthy in society until it realized that it was affecting them too. Okay, disease was breaking out of the ghettos, and they're getting sick too. So then they devised, modern means of public sanitation, which probably accounts more for the health revolution of the 20th century more than modern medicine. Just getting rid of making everyone clean and providing them healthier food. So perhaps there's some sort of enlightened, relatively enlightened oligarchs out there who realize you can't do this. You've gone too far, and they're fighting back. And perhaps that was manifested in the election of Donald Trump. Perhaps.
I hope so. Perhaps.
Perhaps. I'm not saying I know. Oh, he's a shill. Yeah. No. Perhaps. I don't go to the meetings. I'm sorry. I'm not. I don't go to the Eyes Wide Shut parties and talk about these things.
Yeah. Maybe we should. Maybe we should. That's the problem, because people like you and me, we've been excluded from these parties, and that's all the discussions happening.
But okay, now, if you don't think people think this way, I think people know this. If you're familiar with Henry Kissinger's National Security Study Memorandum 200,
if you probably quote from it, I might have heard quotes from it.
He wrote it in 1974. Some said he wrote it when he was taking LSD. But it basically, you have to put it back in the 70s that the Yom Kippur War was fomented. Well, at least some people believe. And I think there's evidence to support this. It was fomented by Henry Kissinger to create the geopolitical circumstances where the price of oil could be quadrupled, go up 400%. And this benefited the oil companies. At the same time, it turned a lot of their ventures profitable overnight. This also coincided, a few years after the collapse of the Bretton Woods system and the shutting of the gold window. And he had negotiated the petrodollar, so all oil sales coming out of the OPEC nations would be denominated in dollars. So every time they sold the oil, they'd get dollars, which they'd put back in American banks, Chase Manhattan Bank. At the same time, they'd buy a bunch of treasury bonds, so it created a vast pool of credit for the federal government. And also they bought a lot of useless weapons from the defense contractors. So it was a big scam. But the whole point is, in 1974, in this memo, NSSM 200, he talks about how the third world, the developing world, needs to be impoverished. The development needs to be stopped. And ways to do this, and also you need to create more hunger and more starvation, so you double their death rate by the year 2000. He actually wrote that in the memo. We need to double the death rate. And one way to do this is one thing. It was the skyrocketing price of oil and energy in general caused these countries to go heavily into debt. Okay, this is part of this business model here. At the same time, it undermined their economies and made them, which increased the death rate, the starvation rate, overall misery index indices in those countries. It stifled development in those countries, which then meant they wouldn't compete as much for natural resources that the Western world, Western corporations coveted. So they wanted to destabilize these economies, destroy local markets for their natural resources, thus driving the price down so they could get access to their resources on the cheap. This is an old economic hitman model. At the same time, they drive them into debt with money created out of thin air, of course, because now we're on the fiat dollar. And of course, the collateral for that debt is the blood, sweat, and tears and resources of those countries. Okay, so this was all laid out. There's like this genocidal, plan to kill off a bunch of, more or less brown people, I guess. At the same time, get access to their resources. And if you read that memo, you're thinking, well, what you're saying. I mean, you're saying if people believe what you're saying is too far-fetched, just read the memo. It's spelled out.
Yeah, and it actually was put into practice.
And it was, because if you look at the debt crisis of the 80s, it was put into practice. And these banks loaned all this money out to these countries, which is ultimately underwritten by the IMF, which is basically all the various the taxpayers of the West, and then the IMF years later gets to go in and impose its structural readjustment programs, which is more or less asset stripping. And then of course the key there is having the local leaders, the proxies there, borrow all the money on the backs of all the people, and they take a big chunk of that money and deposit it in a Swiss bank account.
Yeah.
And so
exactly.
and that's the model. And why do Americans think they're exempt from that type of exploitation?
Exactly, they're not. And I think this is what we're now seeing. You know, they have robbed and stolen like locusts from all around the world, and now they're coming home. You know, because if you're thinking, okay, what are the big business plans in the 21st century or the first half of the 21st century or the next 2 decades? Where can people make really a lot of money? Now it's down to the asset stripping of the West.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we're seeing. You see the public utilities being sold off in the UK. Every last, you know, you've got these public-private partnerships that in the end it always turns out to be just fraud and usury. You know, it's the same thing over and over. And what's so frightening is that people seem to be helpless to stop it. So now the question for, you know, you said previously, it's very hard to inform people and motivate them to even start thinking about these sort of things. I think people, more than you realize, I mean, remember your viewership or listenership is much bigger than you actually might realize based on the gauges you have, you know. I think through the internet, there's this silent mass that is listening to you and understands everything you're saying. You just cannot see that they're there because your view numbers are manipulated. So that's one thing. The other thing is when you want to change a system for the better or for worse, you don't need everybody. You just need the clued in people. So the cartel didn't need us all to help them. They just needed a network. If they can do it, so can we. Mm-hmm. So don't worry about the fact that, you know, people of low interest don't care. We don't need them. We need to act now and use the people who are listening to us to change it now with whoever we have. And I've been just breaking my brain to figure out what on earth to do. You know, for me, it's for me, it's an urgency, because as I'm talking to you now, I'm being shot into my head from my neighbors. I am now sitting behind shielding on my desk. This is Zurich, not Basra, right? And I am sitting at my desk. I have got now 6 aluminium panels around. And as you were speaking, I had to literally cover my head with extra metal because they found a way to shoot into this cubicle, bounce off the walls and hit me in the face. So I'm now, this is how I talk to you. That's the reality, people. This is 2017. I'm in a concentration camp and I've got artillery. You know, I'm taking flak whilst I'm speaking to you. Now, people cannot imagine what that's like because we never had this situation before. Most people don't understand that you can be shot at inside your own 4 walls. Mm-hmm. So there is no better way to say that this is really urgent because I am dying. I am being killed, you know. And I am just one out of thousands and thousands of people. And all those people who think, oh, well, we don't really want to get into it because the intelligence agencies are powerful and then they will start killing us. Well, let me tell you, they're already killing you. They're already killing you with the mobile phone radiation. You know, they're just killing me faster because they started killing me openly before I even opened my mouth. So it's not even about speaking up anymore. I just happen to be in the end state of the program. So, Timothy, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because you have thousands and thousands of listeners, many more than you realized. If they're listening to you, they are very clued in, very intelligent. And somehow, you know, this is what I call the Titanic problem. Katherine Horton spoke about the US administration and that it's now a mix of scorpions who just want to hurt people, you know, the psychopaths. And you have the Titanic turners who try to turn the ship around. And I think she's right in that assessment. But the one caveat I have is that we don't have time to turn the Titanic anymore. We hit the iceberg. We are already sinking. We're in free fall. There's absolutely no way to reverse the GMO damage. There's absolutely no way to get all the nanotech that most people don't even know has been pumped into nature out again. And this stuff is degrading our food supply as we speak. And we will not notice it, but in you know, very soon, maybe 2 years, 3 years, there will be a collapse. So we have to do something today to avert the collapse in 2 years. And my suggestion is, I mean, listening to you, you are one of the brightest people, one of the most informed people I have met, right? Can you think of something that we can do? Can I think of something we can do? And can all those thousands of people who are listening to you think of what the hell to do? You know? How are we going to solve this problem? You know? We have to do something now. And to get back to the Titanic problem, if we think back to the Titanic, the people who were on the Titanic, they hit something. A lot of people noticed. Probably everybody noticed that, they slammed into something. And then they were told, don't worry about it. And they continued dining and dancing and having fun, thinking it's all under control. And then by the time it couldn't be denied because people were, running upstairs screaming that their rooms were being flooded, that's when panic set in. And then we know how it ended, There were not enough lifeboats and most of them died. Okay, we're now on this Titanic. Then as we speak now, there are not enough lifeboats. There are not enough lifeboats. The elite's best idea is to literally go to Mars. Well, that's a stupid idea. That's as stupid as an idea as the idea of the ship captain on the Titanic. That's idiotic. But it's not surprising because they're clinically insane. Most of them are stupid, and their top qualification to be there is that they're pedophiles. So let's not listen to them. Okay, if we were on the Titanic, I asked this question on one of my YouTube videos. I said, okay, if you're on the Titanic and you hit the iceberg, do you think you could have done something to save more lives than they did? And if you think about it this way, people immediately think, well, maybe you could have, I don't know, made something to, use it as a float and put people on it so that you somehow increase the area so that you don't just have lifeboats. Maybe you just rip out the wooden paneling in the first class dining room and you use it as floats. Mm-hmm. Okay, you could have saved more people. Okay, and then let's reiterate, let's brainstorm. And at some point, someone on my YouTube channel commented and said, well, why don't you just put people on the icebergs? Those are the things that float. Those are the only things that float. They're huge. Yeah, that's right. The ship they could navigate the ship for another 4 hours. They could have just driven to the next flat-topped iceberg, chiseled some stairs in, and put 2,000 people on top. Problem solved. Or 200 people, and keep doing that. Mm-hmm. And then pick them up with the ship that came around. So there's a solution. But to come up with these solutions, what the ship captain should have done is he should have announced as soon as they hit, and it was clear that they're going to sink or that they had a serious problem, he should have come forward and said, look, this is the situation. Should we sink? There are not enough lifeboats. We probably have something between 8 to 16 hours before we all die. There were several thousand people on the Titanic. I don't know the exact number.
2,200, 700 survived, 1,500 died, yeah.
Okay, so 1,500 people died. Now, with 1,500 people in 8 hours, and you've got so many people in third class, meaning you've got so many carpenters and actual, manually skilled people, can you come up with something to rip some wooden paneling out and make some floats, for God's sake?
I believe she hit the iceberg at around 11:40 p.m. and finally sank at 2:20 a.m., if I'm correct.
So you don't have much time.
That's the time.
Much time.
Yeah.
That's the time you have. But nevertheless, how long does it take to come up with something? Could you have navigated? I mean, you hit an iceberg, right? Could you have spent 2 hours just doing something? And when you frame the problem like that, you realize, hang on, whatever you do, you could have saved at least a few more people.
Mm-hmm. More lives saved. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? I would be intrigued to actually run this experiment and actually put it out in real life and take a ship like the Titanic and see, was there any material that they could have used to make more people survive? And as soon as you crowdsource ideas, people come up with stuff you would have never dreamt about that works, So I would say we've now announced the Titanic problem. I'm being murdered by the intelligence agencies. Just last Wednesday, I spoke to Swiss intelligence, to a person high up, and I said, please, can you stop killing me? And they didn't. on the drive back, I was again almost assassinated by hard shots into my head. It's now public. It's been on YouTube for donkeys. I had 3 court hearings. I had 6 public appeals to the heads of the intelligence agencies to please stop murdering me, and they cannot stop themselves. So what this means to me is that we've hit the iceberg. Mm-hmm. Right. Can someone please think of something? Mm-hmm. Please. You know?
Well, the problem is that most people are being slow killed, and they don't know it. Gradually poisoned, and when they do know it, they don't know it because they just say, "Oh, I got cancer. Oh, exactly. I got a heart attack. I have diabetes." But these are, but basically this is a product of the pharmaceutical and also the agribusiness and the food industry, which is being gradually poisoned, also being depleted, processed food and these things being depleted. And even our entire lifestyle, because the more people have to work, the more likely are they to use processed foods, right? Mm. If you don't have a wife at home preparing a meal for you, you go painstakingly go through the effort of preparing a meal for you. Yeah. She's going to go home and whip something up in the microwave, and that becomes a lifestyle. But then again, we've all been organized to think that this is great because we're free. You're free to go to work somewhere for somebody. That's great.
Yeah, and you know what you're doing. Exactly. What we're all doing is we're taking the structures that someone else has designed for us, and we just settle. Yeah. We just think that's good enough. It's like taking the instructions from the captain of the Titanic and saying, "Yeah, that's fine with me. We'll just use the lifeboats and nothing else. We'll not think about it." So now we all have to become creative and we have to think about it. And Katherine Horton Fitz actually made a very good point. We had a discussion about what to do about the victims of the intelligence agencies. And she said, well, whatever you do, you have to make it profitable.
Yes.
And I agree.
Yeah. And that's what she's been trying to do, though. And she can't. But this is like long-term profit. Everything's so short-term. And, the people in high finance and Wall Street and basically, you have to like defund Wall Street because that's a criminal operation in and of itself.
That's a good point. How are we going to do it? Because you're right. I think the quickest way is to asset strip them. And the one thing I can think about is just actually gang up, have court cases, gang up on the judges, make it absolutely clear to them that should they step out of line, they will die.
Well, I mean, if you look at 2008, and she calls it a financial coup, and it was. One thing you notice from the outcome of the 2008 financial crisis was more consolidation.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the 29 crash, consolidation. Same thing with the 1907 crash, consolidation. So these financial systems or banking systems are designed to be unstable because just on a whisper campaign, whether it's J.P. Morgan telling people that the Knickerbocker Dress Company is bankrupt, you can cause a panic. Then he can come in as the savior. And that becomes a pretext for the Federal Reserve System. And because then in 29 through 31, the crash occurs, and the Federal Reserve System, there was designed supposedly to provide liquidity or an elastic money supply to avert the disaster, doesn't do it. Lets the economy collapse because the economy collapses. But even though some people lost money in nominal terms, they gained it in real terms because they were able to consolidate. Mm. And money is just it's just an instrument. It's supposedly a store of value and a method for transaction, means of exchange. So these people aren't really concerned with money. To them, that's just a toy.
Yeah, exactly.
They create the money. Yeah. So it's all about getting the resources. The real resources. That's our labor. That's land. It's the mineral wealth of the world. It's control of it, and we're all told to run the rat race for this meaningless Federal Reserve notes, dollars, euros, whatever you're using. But all that money is debt-based money. So the more money we use, the more in debt we are.
Absolutely.
That's satanic. I'm sorry. I mean, that's
it is. It's psychopathic. You know, I mean, the entire Satanism, pseudo religion thing is just essentially brainwashed by psychopaths to allow themselves to, gives themselves a framework. But it's just psychopaths living out their nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? You made a very good point because you said at the very top for these people, it's just it's a toy, it's entertainment. So now the question is, how can you get, if it's really this is what it is, how on earth can you get these people to bottle up their psychopathology for a bit and actually get themselves interested in a new game? You know.
Yes, yeah, get them a new game.
Yeah, because, are these people not bored? I mean, this is what, if I ever met one of these people, which I'm sure I never will, which is probably for the better, I would just say, do you not get bored of the same thing? I mean, they're just executing the same copy and paste business plan over and over.
Well, this is probably one of the reasons for their psychopathology, because they get bored.
Yeah.
At least I think that's a good reason for the sexual deviance.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, let's face it, if you're, if you have everything you want, everything that money can buy, and I'm speaking primarily from the standpoint of a male, and I do think most of these people are men. If you had all the beautiful women in the world, and if that's your attitude towards these things, you're gonna just being bored with it, because it's not based on any love or real compassion or emotion for someone you love. It's based on your own, gratification, narcissistic desire to gratify yourself. So you inevitably descend into some sort of level of perversion or deviancy. You see that in Hollywood and celebrities to a certain extent.
Exactly.
They're not happy people.
Yeah, no, they're not, because and also, I mean, did you see it with Hollywood? You see it with celebrities. You also see it with business plans.
Yeah,
these are devious, degenerate business plans. And at some point, I would just say to these people, look, you are not happy because you haven't exerted yourself, because it's easy to destroy things. Now, the new game of the 21st century has to be essentially all of us, whoever we are, exerting ourselves to excel in repairing and coming up with something new, and actually somehow surviving the Titanic. And the Titanic is a beautiful example because, the people in first class were just marginally less screwed than people in third class.
Yeah.
And this time around, it will be just the same. And they have these grandiose psychopathic ideas about killing off 2/3 of the population, but I keep trying to put this, key information out that you cannot do that with the complex supply chains we have and the complex manufacturing processes we have, because then their laptops will stop working, their toaster will stop working, and there will be not enough people to actually, with expertise to make them again. Mm-hmm. Because every bit of thing we have, a toaster or a computer monitor, relies on thousands of highly specialized parts.
Yes.
And they have employee chains, comprising hundreds of thousands of people, overall millions of people if you look at, all the products we're using. And we cannot get rid of 2/3 of the people. It's a beautiful, in their psychopathic world, a beautiful pipe dream, but it's not practical. So the truth is, with the complexities of the systems we have, we actually need absolutely everybody, especially on the Titanic. Imagine the Titanic, just before hitting the Titanic or being aware that they're sinking, they would have killed off 2/3 of the people, but still not killing off enough people to actually, get everybody in the lifeboats. That's a stupid idea. Mm-hmm. You should actually try to use the people you have on board to pool ideas about what to do, And maybe one person will have the idea of, hey, why don't we just sit on the icebergs, until someone comes. Brilliant, But how many people watched my appeal and didn't have the idea until one guy actually did? I think that's a beautiful solution, Yeah,
actually, I'm looking at a book called Unsinkable, The Full Story of the Titanic. Actually, a pretty good book about the whole thing. But there's a picture of the iceberg. I'm looking at it right now, and there's a rather large plateau that you could probably put a few hundred people on at least.
Yeah, there you go, right? Because the iceberg didn't sink. That was unsinkable. That was truly unsinkable. And can you somehow chisel a staircase into the iceberg to get those people up there? Of course you can.
And they can wait. It'd be warmer there than in the water, definitely. So,
exactly.
Because it wouldn't be wet.
Yeah.
So,
and
Okay, well, listen. Well, we're coming up on 2.5 hours.
Oh God! Oh my goodness!
Time
I'm
flies.
so sorry.
Oh no! That's no. Don't. It was great. It's great. No. Is there anything else you want to address? That
Oh no! I think your listeners have now heard so much.
Yeah. Okay. Not for now.
It's like their heads must be cooking if they listened all the way to the end.
A lot to digest. Yes, of course. But I encourage them to do the background research because there's enough there to research. The books that Eric Carlstrom mentions regarding gang stalking, electronic surveillance, and harassment. The history of it, not only in East Germany or Russia or these barbaric countries abroad, but here in the United States, we have a long history of it too. So whether it's American Protective League during World War I, we had COINTELPRO and Operation Keras here in the 60s in the United States, and that never really ended. And of course, it's been going on here because we have people being harassed in this country, and high-profile cases, of course, are people have heard of what Katherine Horton Fitz went through, but also people like Gary Webb, the reporter who exposed the CIA running drugs into Los Angeles, or in the California, LA area, to fund the Contra operation in Central America in the 1980s. Danny Castellero might be one who was investigating the Promise Software thing and what he called the octopus. I think something that you are dealing with, and we're all dealing with, really, or sort of this cartel. Mike Rupert. Remember Mike Rupert?
No, actually, that name doesn't ring a bell.
He was the LAPD counter-narcotics officer who confronted the CIA, John Deutsch.
Oh wow! See, that's
town hall meeting. Well, he did a lot on 9/11 and these things, and
see, I should read up about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Katherine Horton Fitz either he wrote a foreword to one of her books or she wrote a foreword to one of his books. I forget which one, but he kind of started. He slowly disintegrated. He allegedly committed suicide a few years ago, but his life kind of fell apart, and his life could be what he went through, sort of losing his friends and losing employment. Ended up like living in a trailer and ended up taking his own life.
Oh God!
God! But I mean, these are examples. Gary Webb, of course, he broke this story, and he was then fired from the newspaper, sent to work to some other newspaper, put on boring stories and stuff that he didn't really like. He finally wrote a book called Dark Alliance. The series was called Dark Alliance, about the connections between the crack cocaine epidemic in the United States and the CIA and the operations in Central America regarding Nicaragua and the Contras. But he was slowly marginalized. They broke up his marriage. They exposed an affair he had. He was set up to have an affair. This is what they did to him, and he was slowly disintegrated. And he couldn't find employment anymore. And they say he committed suicide, but that's disputed. Nevertheless, you can be driven to suicide.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, technology can even do that.
Yeah.
Oh God! I mean, you asked for a final word, and I guess one of the things I would like to say, because as we speak, there's also so many veterans who have been targeted, and so many people lost their jobs and are going through this. And some people are close to suicide because they've lost their jobs. Some people are close to suicide because they're being tortured, like I am. But I guess what I would like to say. We need everybody on the Titanic. Please, whoever's listening to this and is thinking about killing themselves, please don't, because we need you. We really need you. We need your ingenuity more than we ever did, ever before. And just don't listen to this nonsense from the psychopaths that we're all dispensable, or that 2/3 of us have to go. That's wrong. That's scientifically wrong. It's mathematically wrong. It's nonsense. The truth is we need absolutely everybody, and we need to solve these problems as quickly as we possibly can. So I just invite everybody to brainstorm and come up with whatever they can do within their means to help us solve all these problems.
And my word on that is anyone who believes that there are too many people on this planet should have the courage to act on their conviction.
Yes, please.
Okay?
Yeah.
It's always somebody else, right, that has to die, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, that's right. Well, Well, Catherine, I want to thank you for spending so much time with me. It's been great.
I would like to thank you for taking the time to listening to me. It's such an honor. It's it's so encouraging to speak to someone like you, and to have the platform to actually air these problems and air the thoughts. So thank you. I'm honored that you took the time to have me on.
Yeah, these conversations, I did the shows. These shows are a form of therapy for me, for myself. So, it's good to just have someone to talk to about it. It's
a great honor.
So great. Well, listen, I'll let you go now, and maybe we'll talk again in the near future.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and hopefully by that time, we'll have come up with some genius idea of if we're going to survive the Titanic.
We'll be on the iceberg together. Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night then, or I guess good afternoon. But I guess there it's probably good night, right?
Yes, it is now 9 p.m. almost. So.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Go grab some dinner or something. So.
I shall. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.